Strategic Risk North Omaha Station recommendation. Mr. Fernandez, would you like to lead this?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for the time for the discussion. We're here to talk about a facility that has powered our region for more than 70 years, our North Omaha Station. It has been a cornerstone of our system, a source of reliability, and a symbol of service to our community. Today, we are at a crossroads. The energy landscape has changed significantly and continues to change. It's time to evaluate how North Omaha Station plans fit into our future. Again, this is not just a technical decision, but it's also a strategic one with implications for availability of power, reliability, affordability, and sustainability for the region. So today, we're going to walk through the facts. This is a very complex topic. It is a topic that I have been discussing with board members for months, going all the way back to the beginning of the year, trying to get our arms around all the different facets that have changed significantly just in the past 18 to 24 months. We're going to attempt to condense a lot of this information in maybe an hour to an hour and a half presentation for the public. I expect board members to ask a lot of questions and have a robust discussion. But I want to clarify with the members of the public that this is not the first time we are discussing these. It is the first time we're doing this in the public setting, but we have had many, many months of discussion and questions. And, going back and what about this, what about that? And we have developed a lot of information. Today we will walk through the facts. We will talk about the challenges ahead, and we will lay out a path forward that balances the needs of our customers, our system, and our community. We're going to put a lot of emphasis on a timeline because that's important. And I think to share with our customer owners that we are responsible utility professionals and we pay attention to a lot of these things. However, the landscape is changing at such a fast pace that it requires us to pause and reassess and make decisions. There are many of these changes that we didn't see coming even just 3 years ago, 2 years ago. And so things change significantly. So you will see a heavy dose here of timeline. We're going to mention timeline quite a bit. And that is for that reason. Next slide. Just to anchor everyone here, this is how we're going to structure the conversation so that anyone who's listening or participating online has a full context into the situation before us. You can see we're going to talk about the context and history. Where were we? What brought us to where we are today? And we're going to have a robust conversation led by Troy Bai, our Chief Operating Officer, on reliability and grid resilience. Brad Underwood will talk a little bit about that too, and he will walk us through affordability and financial impact of these decisions. We will have a conversation about environment and health. And then with Cliff Fleener, our VP of Sustainability and Environmental Affairs, and then Tim McGravy, our Vice President of Customer Service and Public Affairs, will round us up with a community and economic prosperity perspective. After the presentation, then we'll talk about a draft resolution that the board has in front of them, and we'll have a conversation about that and next steps about when the board may consider this resolution forward. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it on to Brad Underwood to walk us through a little bit of context and history for this topic.
So quick process, questions as we go, yeah?
Absolutely, yes. Thank you for that. Yep. Yes, this is going to be a lengthy conversation the way until the end.
Yeah.
So this has been a long discussed matter relative to what's going on with this generator and candidly the importance that this generator plays in our mix. And so let's spend a few minutes kind of talking through an overview of the facility. And if we go to the next slide, please. 2014 was a major milestone for the facility and the board at that time. In 2014, we had a different landscape as it relates to the original decision. So the original decision back then was driven by length, meaning we had more electrical supply than was required to serve the load. it was also driven by the regulatory environment at that time. So the board made the decision back then to start the events that we'll discuss through the end of this slide and through the subsequent slides. In 2016, the timeline for a refuel and retirement was extended. And that was in particular related to units 1 through 3, which at that time transitioned from coal to natural gas. But the extension occurred to facilitate changes that were going on at Fort Calhoun Station, specifically the end of life of that facility and the commencement of decommissioning. And so the board had a robust conversation at that time around the options, and that board deemed that that set of actions was the most appropriate step for us to take. In 2019, we started to see future load growth in, I would say, high resolution detail. So we were looking out, the community was starting to grow, and so we forecasted the load growth and specifically the accompanying system reliability issues that we are going to have about this time in our history, more in the 22, 23 timeframe. So the planners looked out and they saw these things coming. And that was the origins of the discussion for more resources. And in hindsight, those resources turned out to be Flatview Solar, Standing Bear Lake, and Turtle Creek Station. Those resources were specifically identified to solve a specific volume of load in a specific area of our service territory. And they satisfied, or were expected to satisfy, the reliability issues we were going to face, which at that time was primarily a voltage discussion. You're going to hear voltage a lot today. And so one of the ways that I think is most effective to talk about what voltage is and isn't is to think of the analogy of a water hose. And if you were ever playing outside when you were younger and you looked in the hose and you saw water, it doesn't come out of the hose without pressure to displace that volume of water and discharge out the end of the hose. And that is effectively what voltage does. It pressurizes the electric system. And voltage, and specifically the loss of voltage or the volatility and frequency of voltage excursions, is the predominant indicator that you're having trouble with your system that you don't want to have. So sometimes we have voltage issues and we kind of work them out. Troy will talk later about the extent of the voltage issues that we are having and how abnormal those are for us. So that was 2019. I will also add in 2019, when the planners were calling for natural gas in the load pocket, there was a substantial amount of criticism out in the community that was not necessary. And I think in many regards, some of my talented colleagues here sort of had to stand alone and defend what they were seeing and where they were seeing it and why that was a problem. And then we had to kind of talk and work through that. And we're very grateful for the board's support for those resources to ensure a reliable system. Let's step ahead to 2021. This is the worst day for any electric system operator. You lose the system. And so that happened in ERCOT. That happened in Texas. In the Southwest Power Pool, and specifically in eastern Nebraska, we had controlled rolling service and disruptions. And that feels like an outage to a customer, but it is very methodical, and it is effectively the operator's last chance to keep the system up and to keep the system intact. And under certain conditions, utility operators are regulated to do that. And so that was an awful moment. We all know about the fatalities in Texas. 200 some lost souls in that event. And it was, in some regard, a good reminder of the seriousness of these issues and the importance to have the right infrastructure in the right places at the right times that can operate reliably. And so that happened in 2021. In 2022, there were so many requests for generator interconnections through the Southwest Power Pool that the Southwest Power Pool and other RTOs across the country struggled to complete the interconnection studies that are required to be done to make sure that the resources that interconnect to the system have the intended outcomes that they are intended to have, as well as the system can handle that sort of interconnection in those locations. And so from a system reliability, from a stability perspective, from a coordination perspective, as we're all making changes to the largest machine on the earth, which is the Eastern Interconnect, we need to do so in an orderly and controlled manner. And so the generation interconnections timelines started to slip. We weren't getting results fast enough. And at that time, we got more affirmation that had we retired or refueled aspects of the North Omaha facility prematurely, we would be exposed to the reliability issues that we were forecasted to experience in 2019, that the new assets were intended to remedy. Then in 2023, the load continues to go faster. And so new industrial loads, data center demand, and that moment in our history unleashed the single largest infrastructure expansion in our history. It's not close. And I'll read the projects that are on later screen in the presentation. Turtle Creek 3, Cass County 3, 4, 5, diesel backup for Cass County 1 and 2, Pierce County Energy Center, Milligan Wind, and High Banks. If you were adding up the megawatts, that's 2,720 megawatts. North Omaha in total is approximately 500. So at scale, this is massive. And we started that, and we appreciate the board's support in authorizing us to go forth and construct the infrastructure. By 2025, we start to have a much more robust conversation nationally on how the grid is operating. And is it operating the way it had operated in historical times? That conversation nationally was, I'll say, captured well by SPP's product that they called our generational challenge. And I want to cite from the generational challenge as far as building infrastructure that's required to serve customers sufficiently and fast enough. Quote, our risks will increase exponentially if we don't take steps to address our generational challenge, end quote. And as a part of that conversation, we had a noticeable increase in the planning reserve margins. And the planning reserve margin on a practical level is a safety margin, and it's the amount of available electricity you have to have above your forecasted load, because we know that when you have high velocity mechanical equipment, you get failures. And so we have a safety margin. And so the requirement from the RTO to make sure that we had sufficient predictable supply was we're going to have more equipment to ensure that that happens. And while that is exceptionally difficult on load responsible entities like OPPD, OPPD is a load responsible entity. We're on the hook, and we know that. It's our job to serve the load. It's very difficult to deal with a steep increase in the planning reserve margin because it takes a lot of infrastructure. And we'll spend more time later kind of walking through the chronology of the PRM increases. It was actually multiple increases at different times. And so this is kind of a short 11-year overview of what's been going on at the facility, what's been going on around us. I do want to make a brief closing comment that all of the years and the situations that are called out on this slide are are a little bit unique to those years. The common denominator here is change. Throughout the 11 years, a change in load, a change in resource adequacy requirements or system safety margin, a change in the regulatory space. All of this is change, operating experience change. A lot of this has been moving as we've gone down the road, to be super candid. If we can, let's go to the next slide. As we made the decisions that we made on that last slide through that brief 11-year overview, we're subject to this regulatory hierarchy. And so this is a bit of alphabet soup, and I apologize for that, but I'll just kind of talk to these entities and create hopefully some level playing field on the types of regulatory scrutiny that we're subjected to. And I'm going to start in the bottom right. That's OPPD. Many of us are familiar with that. We serve customers. That's what we do. If you move up, you see a box that's SPP, the Southwest Power Pool. The Southwest Power Pool is really managing how markets operate and the transmission footprint throughout the now 17-state region. As Mr. Lang illuminated, it used to be previously 14, but with the expansion, it's 17. And so SPP is kind of managing this broader footprint. They play an important coordination role, reliability role, and that's been very good. SPP has a little bit of a dotted line up to NERC, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation. They do what their title suggests. They establish reliability standards, and there are robust reliability standards in and throughout the electric industry. The MRO to the left of the Southwest Power Pool is the enforcement arm of NERC. So if you have a NERC violation, you get a lot of interaction with the MRO. That is not a good thing. You don't want to have enforcement from NERC, and thankfully we have a long history of avoiding that. But the MRO is really the enforcement arm of NERC. Above those entities is FERC. And FERC is an independent regulatory agency that really regulates the electric and gas industry in the country. They approve what we would call our tariffs, which are really in large part the market rules for how the electric, gas, and marketplace will operate. They settle disputes, and they act in a judicial capacity in the event they need to settle disagreements between entities. The Department of Energy established FERC as that independent agency, and the Department of Energy ultimately in some form is accountable for all of the entities to make sure they operate the way they should. And so that's why we want to show the layers of hierarchy here, is it's heavily regulated. And so as we move from the levels of regulation.
Hey, Brett,
Yes, sir.
on this slide. As we look at that, could you remind us what approvals are required for the planned fuel switch at North Omaha? What hoops do we need to go through in order?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are a number of them, and so I will list them, and if I miss one, please feel free to jump in. The first thing that we established, which was self-imposed, was we need to have new generators on because we can't just turn North Omaha off. That has an unacceptable outcome to the community. So the first thing was we had to have the new generators constructed. Then we had to get what's called a permanent generation interconnection agreement. So you have the physical construction of the unit, and then you have the agreement that mutually outlines the expectations between us and the Southwest Power Pool on us interconnecting the resource to the grid. So there's the early two. And then it is what is deemed in SPP tariff language as a material modification to turn units off. So that would be 1 through 3 ceasing operations. It is also a material modification to refuel a unit from coal to gas because of how differently those fuel types operate on the same unit. And so that's kind of the 4 big ones. We have not started the,
Time out, Brett. So that last piece, it's one that SPP.
Yeah.
Plays a role. So you described that with you. So it's one, once we're ready, that major notification goes to SPP. What is it? What can and would SPP reply to us?
yep. So SPP will look at a number of things, but I'll summarize them as mainly system reliability and power flows. And if this generator changes fuel types or goes away and ceases operations, is there an unacceptable outcome on the reliability side of the footprint? So they may come back and say, yep, that looks great, go ahead and do it. Or they may come back and say, no, there are specific problems posed by this, and these things need to be dealt with before this transition can occur.
So, yeah, thank you.
Sure.
In other words, we don't have independent authority to go forward. I'm naming that
Correct.
it's not a clear path, whatever decision we make, there's
Correct.
one step in the process. And I have to, is it fair to assume then that given some of what we're hearing from SPP about grid stability, they're gonna look at it with a critical eye? Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay. We don't know what they'll say. Right?
Right. Well, so I'm going to touch on what Brad talked about earlier, that self-imposed piece. Well, we have really bright engineers. Some of them are here in the room, and they work closely with SPP engineers. So we know how they run their models. We know the reliability not only of OPPD but the system. So in anticipation of what would be needed for us to retire units or refuel units, we knew exactly what we needed to do.
Mm-hmm.
Now, things have changed, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. A notice from SPP back to us would unlikely come as a surprise for them because we know what's needed. And really, what you're going to hear from my team today is things have changed enough that if we were to proceed, SPP would probably have a lot to say about this.
Mm-hmm.
The same things that our engineers are probably are saying today about this. Now, let me quickly, we voluntarily joined the Southwest Power Pool. That's another question I get often. Hey, so we have to obey SPP? Well, under the current construct, yes, because we chose to participate and we are a member utility of the Southwest Power Pool. So by virtue of joining, we agreed to work and play along with the rules that established. Well, why can't you just withdraw from SPP? It's another question I get asked. Well, if we were to do that, there's lots of consequences with that. But in a nutshell would be, well, if it's hard for us to keep all the resources up and ready and operating as a pool, if we decided to draw an island around those, it would be even harder for us. So there are many benefits of being a part of that pool because we get to draw from resources from 17 states and transmission resources, generation resources that arguably make it easier for each individual utility to keep the lights on. So I just wanted to.
Thank you.
Yeah, SPP is often analogized to an air traffic controller. And in that example, everybody owns their own planes. They all have their own routes, but the air traffic controller is making sure there's no unintended safety outcome. And so that's a critical position for us.
We anticipate a response from SPP at some point about evaluating the potential change to the system.
So clarification for me, you're talking about the refuel and the retirement. The order of operations for us has been finish the generators and get the generation interconnection agreement. And we're very close to the generator interconnection agreement, but we don't have that yet. That would be the green light that the new resources could come on and we could advance to the next layer of discussion with the refuel retire.
So under the current plan, which is retire or refuel by December of next year, sometime in the next few months, we would send notification to SPP about the major modification of the units, awaiting them to come back. Well, say timeout. You can't do this. Or yes, the system looks good. Go ahead.
Okay. Not hearing any more questions. We'll transition to Troy here and we can talk about some rapidly changing grid timing.
While Troy's making his way to the speaker's podium, we haven't planned a break in this presentation. So if you need to get up and go and come back.
All right. Well, Brad hit on some of the things that I'm going to talk about here, but just at a high level, just to make sure folks understand, Brad's group plans the grid. They look out in forward space. They have models. My group constructs, operates, and maintains those units. We work together very closely. We share what's going on in operational space with how they plan. And so I'm gonna kind of take a step back here and I'm gonna make a statement about the U.S. power grid, which aligns very close to what Brad said. I'll step down for 2 slides here on the regional aspects of what we're seeing in the Southwest Power Pool. And then I'll focus in on something a little more local to some of the issues that we're having here in the Omaha area, and then kind of talk through the monumental list of things that we're doing to try to work through those challenges. I would also like to point out the regulators, whether it's NERC or the Southwest Power Pool or some of the RTOs in the United States, are becoming very vocal about their concerns of the state of the system. I think this slide here with the graphic kind of helps articulate it, specifically focused on the Southwest Power Pool. But if you look at the graphic that's on the right side of the screen, you can see dates from 2016 to 2025. And then you see bars that step up over time at a pretty fast rate. And what those are counts of communications from the Southwest Power Pool of concerns or risks that they see on the grid for any certain year. Hardly any in 2016 through 18, ramped up to nearly 30, a little over 30 in 2024. 25 is looking very similar. What that signals to the grid is, hey, there's a lot of things going on. More than 30 of these in a given year. Utilities have to take extra steps during these times. We have to change sometimes our maintenance programs, things of that nature, maintenance timing. But it's really an indication of the health of the grid. As this thing goes up, that's an indication that the Southwest Power Pool is becoming more concerned about how strong the grid is, how healthy the grid is in these particular instances. And just to highlight for those who aren't familiar with the Southwest Power Pool, I know we talked about the number of states, but I mean, we're talking about an area from Canada down to North Texas and from Colorado to Iowa and that kind of span. And you'll see a visual of that coming up in a couple of different slides. I kind of think about this a little bit like my blood pressure. You know, rising numbers are not good, probably means I need to take some action. This type of information coming from the RTO is very, very similar, where it's kind of a predictor of risk.
And this is probably related to your blood pressure. While you're here, I'll comment on something relatively quick, but very important. This is concerning the Southwest Power Pool. Just yesterday released their winter 2025-2026 reliability forecast, and they do this every year. They look at, hey, what's coming ahead of us, load coming in here really soon in the winter, what resources we have, what temperatures are we expecting, what conditions we expect. And if you remember, many times here in this type of setting, we have talked about the 5.9 reliability standard, the 99.999 standard. That is the 1 day in 10-year outage probability of outages. Right? That's how we typically plan the grid. We're aiming for that. Just a few months ago, we had SPP CEO here talking to us in closed session and talking about that and how that has degraded over time. The report from yesterday says that anticipating the current load, peak load, so no growth in load peak, there is only a 97% probability of us having enough resources to keep power on. Going from 99.999 to 97 may not sound big to the average person. That is enormous for us. That means that there's a 3% chance of the pool not having enough resources to keep the power on. 3% chance in the winter. Our winter here is scheduled to last 88 days. That's 2.5 days of probability of us not having power this coming winter. And that has continued. Last year was 98.5. This year was 97. So that, and this was released yesterday, that really speaks to the number and the frequency of alerts of resource advisories, conservative operations that we're seeing on the grid. This is very closely related to the new requirements, and we're going to talk about that
Later, yep.
next few slides. For additional resources to increase the planned reserve margin, we need more reserves because that reliability, that probability is getting worse every year.
And just to reiterate what you're talking about, this is from North Dakota down to Texas. This is the broad area that the Southwest Power Pool is talking about. It's not Omaha specific. So the questions then come is what's driving this? And you heard Brad talk about change. You have a rapidly changing grid title above, but I'm going to talk about a few things because it's not just one. It's a fluid situation. We have an explosion of load. So the last few years we've seen load not just here, but across a good portion of the United States. You have electrification, you have data centers, you have EVs, you have things of that nature. All you have to do is drive around Omaha or Kansas City or Des Moines or any of the cities around here, and you see new apartment complexes, new homes, new subdivisions, new businesses, new industrial. And so that growth has been quite different than what we've seen in the past. Brad showed a graphic earlier in the financial update that showed a flattening in the early 2000s with a steep incline. And that's definitely what we're seeing in that particular space. So load number one, we've had changing regulations and aging assets that have caused retirements over the last 10 years. You've seen traditional generation go through retirements, often replaced with renewables in different locations. The grids were originally built around kind of that traditional generation in this location, which tended to be closer to the load pockets. So you've seen that change over time. The timeline to build new infrastructure is basically doubled, whether it's transmission or generation. So for you to be able to fix something that's significant, like the items that I'm going to go through here in a few slides, you've moved from 3 to 5 years to 5 to 7 in many cases to complete the infrastructure that may be needed for that. And unfortunately, we've all seen and experienced some pretty extreme weather, especially during the winter times the last few years. We've had outages and things of that nature on the grid, and those obviously have taken place during times when it's really cold or really hot and not optimal from that standpoint. It's amazing the amount of change that we've seen from that, including freezing rivers in the winter, the last couple of winters, which were kind of unheard of before. We all saw firsthand what happened with Winter Storm Uri in 2021. Brad mentioned that was a huge turning point due to the significant impacts to not just infrastructure that was damaged throughout southern SPP and then to Texas, but the loss of lives that we saw in Texas in that space. So I would say that this is a good call to making sure that as we think about infrastructure, we take the time we need to really think about the risks associated with it. We don't have the margin for error that the grid had maybe 10 years ago when there was a lot of excess on the grid. So we need to be very thoughtful in that particular space. This next slide, if you want to go ahead and transition, is kind of continues this conversation here. It's a regional view of the Southwest Power Pool. And specifically speaking, you see some dark spots on the system starting to emerge. And so what the Southwest Power Pool has done is created a list of areas that have the most risk from a power flow standpoint, not being able to move electrons in and out of regions to ensure the reliability that is needed. And so why does that matter? I think we heard about this earlier kind of with the voltage, but similar to the artery system in our body, you need to have this transmission available to move the electron from different locations So the location and volume of transmission, as well as where your generation is, matters in this case. And I want to highlight again, like there are several states up here, not just Nebraska, not just eastern Nebraska, but you see northern Texas, you see Oklahoma, Kansas, Missouri. You're starting to see things pop up in Minnesota and South Dakotas. So there's some limitations on the grid. The Southwest Power Pool is starting to give directions for utilities to build a lot of infrastructure from a transmission standpoint to try to stitch this together. Some of you probably remember just a handful of years ago, there was new transmission built to the southern part of our footprint down to Kansas City because there were constraints. That capacity of that line, those lines have become taken since then. And so there's less capacity in this space. One thing I will highlight here is just 2 years ago, Southeast Nebraska didn't make this list. We weren't highlighted. So a lot has changed in a period of just 2 years, which kind of goes to the fact that things are changing pretty quickly in this space. And I think planners and utilities and infrastructure is very difficult to get in with this kind of speed. And it's the physics that's causing this. It's not enough generation in the right locations and not enough transmission, as I kind of mentioned earlier. We'll go through some of the things that we're doing here locally. All of our generation is extremely important when trying to navigate these constraints that we see on here. So generation on the right side of the constraint allows us to kind of push back and reduce some of the loading that we see on the transmission lines. Loading on the transmission lines have to be limited because if it gets too high, they burn up and fall to the ground. That is never a good thing for us to be in that particular state. So my operations folks don't necessarily look at what is the fuel type and things of that nature. They look at the assets, the generation, as tools. Tools to push back on the system where they need to push back, tools that help with voltage and support and all those kind of things that you need, frequency regulation, things of that you need to keep the system in a solid state and avoid the potential for blackouts, which is not something that we ever want to see as a utility. Obviously, we've seen some rolling blackouts. We don't want to be in that space. And so paying close attention to this is super important because all these assets, including North Omaha, allows us to manage this congestion in a very important and meaningful way. The next slide is an actual visual of constraints or the system in kind of a non-constrained aspect on the left, the blue, and on a very constrained aspect on the right. And these are from SPP. It's kind of real-time operations. So you really want power to be able to flow pretty evenly throughout the footprint. That's how you get the best outcome. That's how you make sure that all the electrons get to where they need to be, which is showing up in the blue side. The hot colors that you see on the right, the oranges, the reds, those brighter colors are a signal to the market that there is not enough generation currently on the grid. And this is a snapshot of time. And that's signaling to all utilities to start bringing up your generation to help offset this because power is getting bottlenecked in the southern part of the footprint. You have a lot of wind up north in the Dakotas. Nebraska, northeast Nebraska has a lot. You've got a lot of wind down in Kansas and Oklahoma, and so you have lots of power flows that move up and down this section. And this is just a good example of kind of what happens in real time. Now we're managing this. The Southwest Power Pool is managing this. We have the tools that we need, but this is happening a lot more frequently. And this is just again a visual representation of some of the issues that I showed on the last slide.
If I may, on this one, I have engaged in many conversations with my peers, with board members of Southwest Power Pool and others, where I've talked about how for decades we've designed these markets to optimize our resources, collected our pool resources. But all of that has been done under the assumption that there are always electrons available in the grid. So it's a matter of pricing, right? Incentivizing generators enough with a higher price to turn on generation and disincentivizing others to turn off generation. Like on that graph, when you see that purple, That's negative prices. It's basically telling people in that area, stop generating, because our transmission lines are full. But what's interesting here, and I think this is a paradigm that all of us in the industry are shifting to. You asked me earlier, what are your colleagues and the CEOs of other utilities saying? Well, when it comes to these, the paradigm is shifting to a place where we are coming from a place of really there's no abundance, there's no excess electrons. So at some point you get to a place where pricing and price signals are not enough. If you don't have enough transmission and generation, it doesn't really matter how much price you offer or incentives you put on the table. The electrons are not there, and I think that's probably where part of the conversation is going. We can't just fix these with prices and optimizing the market. We need to incentivize construction of new infrastructure so that we can get back on a place where we can then optimize the market once we have resources.
Yeah, thanks for that additional. And so, the fix for that is obviously generation and transmission in the right locations, as well as some voltage related devices that we can talk a little bit about later. Next slide, please.
Sorry, Troy. I want to pick on that for a moment. You said the solution to that is generation in the right place, transmission in the right place. How do I need to think about generation fuel type?
This is a good conversation for the planners, right? Because there's complex models that are put into place that look at what's the probability of output, where's it at, how volatile is it, where do you need kind of ramping capability, or where do you need consistency, or where is it okay to have intermittence? And I think the way I tend to like to think about it is it's a lot like your 401k. You better have a diverse portfolio there for the best outcome, and you have to have balance. And you have to have balance of consistency. And you have to have balance of types of generation that provides inertia or regulation capabilities, can ramp up and down and follow the load, or voltage support. So it's less about fuel, what kind of fuel does it use, but what is the characteristics of the generation at hand, and does that generation characteristic meet the need? And so for us, historically, right, we've been building generation the best we can close to our load pocket. All the new stuff that's going in, that's especially natural gas. We just have a solar facility that's pretty close to. Most of our wind is more remote, so it has to travel a lot further. It's in many cases, northern Nebraska that have to travel in. So all those things have to be considered as you start to think about what type of portfolio. There's no perfect type of generation. They all have strengths. They all have weaknesses. It's the melding of those together to make sure that they meet the type of system load you have, where you have it, to make sure you're reliable. Hopefully I answered your question.
Yes, you did. Yeah, thank you.
I think the other thing, if it's okay, this might be a good time to add this perspective is, voltage issues in the North Omaha area. Voltage devices can help with that. But what we also have are flow issues, thermal flow issues. And the voltage devices don't give the operators a tool to deal with that because they don't solve that problem. And so North Omaha is uniquely positioned in the load pocket to be able to deal or equip our operators to deal more with flows issues in addition to voltage issues, in addition to the inertia and other things they provide. And so I'm getting a little deep here, but that is what makes it unique. And I didn't want to overlook that specifically in the winter.
Well, I mean, this is about North Omaha, right? So that's helpful. Help me understand then the difference between thermal flow issues and voltage issues. What's the difference?
Yeah.
Educate me.
We got some folks in the room that, make a living on this. I would characterize it that a thermal issue means you have too much electricity going over a specific piece of transmission or distribution line, and you're starting to compromise the line. In other words,
It's too hot.
It's too much electricity.
Okay.
It's a heat issue.
Okay.
The voltage issue is not a heat issue. It has more to do with the pressure of that area of the system. And the voltage is keeping the system up. If there's insufficient voltage, there's insufficient pressure and your system can collapse.
Okay.
And anything more than that, Mr. Linehan will come up and
Okay.
talk to that.
Can we go back one slide? All the colorful maps. Okay, so on these one, I think it's important also to talk about the region. And what we have heard, we have seen from the Southwest Power Pool and comments that we have gotten from the Southwest Power Pool. Some of them were made here in this room to board members in closed session. Where SPP studies different things with different timeframes, but within 10 years, they studied about 2,800 megawatts of planned retirements. And of that amount, a little bit over 2,100 megawatts have been withdrawn from being retired. 2,800 megawatts that were planning to be retired, 2,100 of those saying no longer, we can no longer retire those. Beyond the 10-year horizon, they are seeing a little bit over 8,000 megawatts, 8 gigawatts of retirements that have been since deferred, probably because they're seeing all of these. So it's out of the 17 states that we cover. This is something that is happening on pretty much every corner of at least of the footprint of the Southwest Power footprint. We're not alone. We're not the only ones considering these. In fact, there are many others who not only have considered, but they've actually taken action to delay retirement of units. And I think that's important, an important piece here in the context as to how do we solve these? Well, many others are helping to solve by keeping more generation online longer than planned.
All right.
Good.
Good. Backup one. There you go. All right, so we've been talking about the region, and Brad kind of opened it up for us here. We're actually going to talk about some local issues that we're seeing from a voltage standpoint, mainly a low voltage standpoint in the North Omaha area. And so what's interesting about this is we've seen a 300% increase in the number of these low voltage events over the course of just the last few years. Interestingly, that's at the same time that, we're starting to see the SPP talk about the broader flow issues that are taking place on the greater bulk electric system. So probably some causation in there between the two, but we're seeing this 300% increase now. Now we're managing it. Those customers don't even know that we're dealing with this. Our generation has the ability to adjust its voltage at North Omaha specifically to manage this. We did have some times this summer where we needed North Omaha and Turtle Creek to manage some of the swings that we were seeing, which was kind of new. We've never really needed to use another generation station before to do that. So that's kind of a change in that particular state that has definitely caught our eye. And as Brad mentioned, if voltage drops, the ways you kind of take care of that is through either changing the bar output of your generation. That's your first step. That's the most influential step. The closer the generation is to the location that you're having issue has the highest potential benefit. After that, you can ask the Southwest Power Pool to see if they have the ability to reconfigure the system. So take some lines out, put some lines in, things of that nature. Sometimes that can help. Your third choice is you start to curtail customers in the region that's having the voltage issue to reset it. So those are kind of the three steps you take as a utility to address something like this, which obviously we don't want to get to the last step. That's the last step we probably want to get to. I will go over here in just a bit several utilities that have been dealing with this over the past few years, but that is top of mind for us and not a space that we definitely want to be in.
So would these be similar to a rolling blackout, just these will be localized in these particular circuits?
Yeah, unlike what we saw in 2021, which was the entire Southwest Power Pool footprint taking turns. This would be specific to the circuits in the North Omaha area that we would have to address. So very, very localized. Something down in Bellevue is not necessarily going to help something that's in this area from the voltage.
So the circuits we're seeing here in and around North Omaha Station are the most significant low voltage events in our system.
Yes. Those are the ones that our teams are dealing the most with. We are starting to see some in the south rural at the very bottom of our service territory, that we'll need to address, but these are the ones that cause the most concern.
I had a similar question, good question, Eric. Help me understand, I think about like instances, that's one way to count it, right? So we acknowledging that there's an increase in the number of instances where we're seeing low voltage events, but that tells me we've gone below a certain threshold.
Yeah.
It doesn't tell me how close we are to a place where we've got to start curtailing. How close are we getting with some of these to the?
So historically, we've not been that close. And as I mentioned, we had to use a second plant this summer, a new Turtle Creek plant, because we couldn't take care of it all with the units we're running. So the margin that we would have before is starting to deteriorate. This is what I'd say. We were able to manage it very well with those two facilities, but it's a step change from where. And so you start to take North Omaha out of the mix. Now I don't have a pretty large plant very close to the voltage issue to manage through some of these excursions.
Okay, that's helpful. And tell me if I'm wrong here. Is it accurate to say that it's difficult, if not impossible, to know? I'm just imagining an equation where we say, okay, we take that load off, and the frequency with which the voltage goes lower is X, right? Like I'm trying to understand the forecast as opposed to the history behind us in these two
It's
scenarios.
very difficult to forecast what voltage is going to look like. Tell me what the load in all the surrounding states are going to do. Tell me what transmission's out. Tell me what distribution's out. What generations there are not there, what the variable resources are doing. So all that matters when it comes to voltage. And so that's not really something, now Brad's team can run models that give you indications of, hey, yeah, we're getting close to some concerns. But they don't prescribe exactly what you would expect under multiple different scenarios with the voltage. So for us, it's like, again, when we had excess margin, we were able to take care of this all very easily with North Omaha. Then when you had Turtle Creek coming and Standing Bear coming in the future, you're like, okay, we got something. We were surprised to see that we needed a second asset this summer to meet the needs.
The modeling that we're describing then sounds like it's difficult, if not impossible to do. It's not something that we would do as part of our integrated system planning. It's not something that SPP would do as part of their study.
So SPP would not necessarily address this. Brad, keep me honest if that's the case. But the ISP should look at, okay, what's the state of the system? We know this is an issue. What are the different potential fixes above and beyond generation? Are there capacitors? Are there other things that we can solve one problem with? As a reminder, Brad mentioned there are a few problems we're trying to solve, right? It's the thermal piece, the voltage piece, the stability piece. And so there's only a certain combination of things that actually address those.
So some of these things are specific to the voltage level. So as an example, if you have a distribution circuit that's 13.8, and let's just say for discussion purposes, that's the voltage 13.8. And there's 10 customers on there, and one customer wants to interconnect. So the teams will do a study, they'll look at the circuit, and they'll say that interconnecting customer creates an exceedance efficiency, and we have to rebuild the circuit, for lack of a better term, to get that customer energized. So that is a low voltage situation on the distribution system that's relatively isolated.
Mhm.
What Troy is talking about here are higher voltage network segments that are more susceptible to having issues when you have voltage or flow challenges on the 161 and 345. And that is a much harder state of system to study
Okay.
because there are so many dynamics at that voltage level that your velocity and the movement of some of these attributes are so diverse that you just can't get a clean look at it like you could low voltage isolated on a distribution circuit.
Can I dig in just a little bit? Because one of my questions is around power factor. Do we have any customers on these circuits that have an unusually low power factor that could be causing
I
this problem?
I would call for aid with that. Here's what I think, and you all can, and Tim might be able to reinforce this. We have requirements for customers to stay within a certain band. I think that probably came from our planning group over time to make sure that customers are staying within a band so that they don't drag the rest of the system down. with
Right.
them. So there are those contractual obligations, I believe, with our customers.
I'll actually defer to Janae if you have a quick answer on, I would have to do some research.
We have power factor requirements. I'm trying to answer this accurately. For distribution, we want to keep it above 85%, where we have a tariff language in our rates where they need to pay for not running efficiently. And I'm gonna phone you for the.
Yeah, I probably want to make a couple points now since I have the
I
background.
want to stand up and come to the,
Yeah, Dan Lenahan, Senior Director, Integrated System Planning. So my group is the planning and modeling for our transmission and distribution grid and resource planning as well. So our group looks at forecasts for our system and tries to plan it out the best we can based on the information we can. Couple points I'm going to make. Transmission grid planning, which looks at voltage and thermal capacity of the system, is heavily regulated by the federal government. I think there was a slide earlier in here that talked about that. The way we plan the system is ensuring we are in alignment with those federal mandated requirements for planning the grid. SPP follows those same things. We do our local assessment studies based on the best information we know. SPP does their studies on the region-wide basis, based on the best information they know. Based on all the studies we've done, we have seen voltage trend lower on our system based on load growth and other factors, but we haven't seen it been breached below the threshold. If it were breached in our planning models below a threshold, action would be required to be taken. What we're talking about here is the planning models aren't doing a great job of catching what's going on in real-time operations. And why is that? The grid is changing faster than planners can keep up with this. That's not just an OPPD statement. If you looked up, just Google top risks to grid reliability in the country, our federal grid reliability regulator, NERC, said the biggest risk is the grid is changing so fast, the planners can't keep up with it from their modeling. The operators can't keep up with it in real-time operations. What's changing? The generation resource mix is changing dramatically. Extreme weather events are increasing in intensity and frequency. That combination in and of itself has been challenging. Now we have this third layer of new large loads coming on the system at a very quick clip. Our group analyzes whenever any new large load wants to connect to our system. But when there's other loads going on around the system, the totality of that changes the whole grid dynamic because we're so interconnected to each other. It just makes it extremely complex to plan the system and operate the system. So this is the kind of stuff that can happen that doesn't get predicted in a planning analysis. And Troy's got some examples of where, from the planning standpoint, the system looked like it was going to be okay. Now we're seeing potentials or issues of controlled blackouts across the country because the planning models can't predict some of the stuff that's going on in the system. So maybe turn it back over to Troy to walk through some of those examples.
Before I go over that, just to highlight, it's probably not.
Did that answer your question?
Not really. I mean, it gave me a lot higher level, but like, as we look at these distribution systems specifically, is there a customer or a handful of customers that are receiving penalties for load power factor that we're still allowed to take service that might be degrading our system more than we would like? And do we need to be working with those customers directly?
Director Bogner, can I take a follow-up and I'll get you, I know there's a few in that area, but I want to do more research.
Absolutely. And certainly in a public setting, I would never ask you to name a customer, right? But I'm just thinking about how this all works and like, what do we have control over? How does the bigger system interject? And then actually, you know, are there specific customers we should be working with to help solve a very perceived local issue that affects a bigger system? So.
I don't know, right, in this area, the distribution circuits you're talking about are 93%, I think, residential.
Okay.
So there are some others, but there's not like, you know, a big monstrous data center. So I think that's something we can bring back. I know power factor has been something we've talked about in the past and feel pretty good about it.
I think process wise in the service regulations, you all have equipped us to deal with that.
Yeah.
In the event there is a customer that's some unintended challenges here, and we should be dealing with that, but we'll take the go do and bring you.
Can I quickly just public service another? If you can please speak up a little bit, because these mics may not be picking up everyone's voice, and I want to make sure that the quality of the sound is good for those watching online.
Thank you.
All right, one more thing I want to highlight before we kind of talk about the controlled customer blackouts that have happened in the United States, and there's only a few of them listed here. Is North Omaha, if it's converted, is only available about half the year. And that's because it's at the end of these distribution systems. There's not enough natural gas to have the whole site there on gas or run during the winter time. And I think that's really important because as a tool, as we talked about, that tool would go away during the winter time and still be there during the summer. But the winter is obviously important, and actually the areas that have been having some of the most issues with the extreme weather that's come through the last few years. But I just wanted to highlight that. I think sometimes that gets lost in the conversation.
And Troy, to state the obvious, it's cost prohibitive for us or MUD or anyone else to add additional capacity for natural gas.
It would take a large infrastructure adjustment to get them off.
It's an urban gas build.
Yes.
Very challenged.
Awesome.
Noted.
I'd probably build in another location. So.
So, to your point, it would only be available about half the year. I guess, do we know what is the current capacity factor for North Omaha Station units now? We have a number for annual.
60%.
4 and 5 are approximately 60%, and then 1 through 3 are very modest. But
They've been converted to gas or balancing.
Single digits.
yes, sir. But when 1 through 3 generate, they are usually during very critical times.
In the summer, there are critical times in the winter, but those are usually not available.
And on the low voltage incidents, we start a new generator as a response to a low voltage incident, or what helps to address type of problems described on that method?
So you can, if it's a peaking unit, you can start it very quickly, you know, like on new units that we're building, you could. Generally speaking, though, the first step for us is because North Omaha 4 and 5 run pretty consistently, we change the voltage output of those units to push additional bars into the system. So that's your first line of defense. If those units want to do something else, just as a reminder, units 1 through 3 in the current state take about 24 hours to start. So if you have a voltage issue, which a lot of times is in real time operations, you wouldn't have the time to start those units and get them up to where they need to be. So in the past, we've had to plan a little further ahead, make sure we had some margin, maybe start one of those North Omaha units a day early because we aren't sure. But that's the kind of situation. Yeah, that's how we managed it.
But they essentially have to already be running in order to provide the additional VARs to give them ultimate support.
Yes, they have to be online. Yeah. Dan had mentioned that we've seen some events. So obviously we saw an issue here in Nebraska, February 21. We had the polar vortex during 2022, and this isn't on the slide yet, but because we kind of ran out of room, North Carolina, Kentucky, South Carolina, Tennessee, all had to move through rolling blackouts because of not enough capacity and transmission available during the Elliott winter event. And just this year in 2025, New Orleans, Baltimore, and Wyoming had these localized events where they had to cut customers off. So our industry as a whole needs to take action, right? This is a clear example of how things are trending, how the grid as a whole has degraded from what it used to be, and that the industry needs substantial infrastructure in place and good federal policy. I'll just toss that in for good luck, because you need to have consistency in policy and permitting and things of that nature for utilities to build these long-term assets. Now, what we're doing about all this is the next slide, and this has all obviously kept Brad and the finance team very busy trying to figure out how to pay for all this stuff. But we're in a time period of unprecedented action and construction. Our capital budgets for construction of generation and transmission are well above anything we've seen in the past, because we're trying to solve some of the problems that were identified on earlier slides. And so for major 345 and 161 transmission projects, we are adding and upgrading transmission that's about the equivalent between driving from here to Kearney. And that's just in the strip that you're seeing here. So close to 200 miles. There's another 200 miles of transmission that's on the plan that doesn't necessarily affect this piece of it, but it's really important because it's replacing infrastructure, it's adding additional capacity. It's not directly in this little segment. And the segment is that seam that we were talking about earlier that sometimes has some thermal limitations that we're trying to work through. Basically, OPPD's 10-year build out of transmission is equivalent to a 40-year normal plan for us. So we're taking what we normally do over 40 years, squishing it into 10 to try to work through all of this. As you can imagine, there's a lot of work in place there. Some of these transmission items have been put in service. We have some coming up the next few years. And then the big infrastructure that kind of runs across the eastern side of Nebraska, we would expect to be in service sometime around 2032 or 33. We still have to procure some things to know the exact time frame, but pretty substantial in that space. So this is like the major artery that runs in and out of Omaha. This is the major artery, all the way down to Kansas City, all the way up to northern Nebraska. So it's super important for us to strengthen this location. And additionally, if you look down below, by 2029, we will have essentially doubled our generation portfolio. You see natural gas in there. You see a lot of wind and solar and battery. So we're adding generation about as quickly as we possibly can. At the same time, we're adding a lot of new transmission. It's not just us. Our neighbors are starting down this path. We're a little early compared to most of the surrounding neighbors, but you start to hear, I think Javier mentioned it earlier, all those utilities that are around us are starting the same type of journey, and we'll continue it with us. The Southwest Power Pool has recently identified a lot of new transmission, especially in the, kind of that southern footprint, with an expectation of even more in the north in the future. So it's something that's going to take all the utilities in the Southwest Power Pool to work through and resolve, and it's going to take the time that we need to do it. But I'm telling you, we are busier now doing this than we ever have in the past. And the infrastructure volume and speed is pretty amazing and not without challenge, obviously. So as most of the board members is aware. And that's all I had on this piece. Brad has some additional items. Are there any questions about what's been presented so far? All right.
Thanks, Troy. Let's go to the next slide, please, Ms. Lane. We talked about this slide earlier in the COP. For those that maybe weren't able to catch that piece of the conversation, we've added a meter count equivalent to the entire city of Grand Island at 23,000 meters the last 5 years. And then our summer peak has grown by 544 megawatts, which is 22%. And our winter peak has grown by 473 megawatts, which is a 27% increase. The only change on this slide relative to the slide shown earlier is that this has a 2030 forecasted peak. That's not the end of our load forecast. Our load forecast exceeds that in future years. We just picked 2030 to show on a relative basis that we expect this trend to continue. We need to be prepared to serve that reliably as an organization.
Hey, Brad, the winter peak for January of 2025, does that include the new reserve margin?
Yeah, great question. This is actually just low. Yeah, so this is just the total coincident peak demand on the system. Yeah. Okay, we'll go to the next slide, please. So we opened this conversation with a set of subjects giving an overview on the North Omaha history over the last 11 years and how so many things have changed. And there's been so many unique decisions over the last decade, but that the common denominators were more load, changing regulatory requirements, energy availability, reliability implications. And one of those changes was the PRM. And so we had someone internally kind of vision this slide. And I think it allows us to really talk about the road we've been on relative to the planning reserve margin. And so I just kind of want to highlight a few sections here. The top box, for lack of a better word, or the top row is the winter PRM volumes, the planning reserve margin. Again, this is a safety quantity for us, the expected generation supply above our forecasted peak load. And the bottom box has a series of events that have occurred or an action that's been taken. So the origins, a lot of this, or the consensus of the origins, was really in February 2021, which was Winter Storm Uri. Shortly after that, in February of 2022, you can see in that top row, MISO, which is a large mid-continent independent system operator to our east, changed their planning reserve margin in the winter to 25.5%. At the time, that was a noticeable increase for a neighboring RTO. And we were starting to expect that kind of magnitude movement for the Southwest power pool. In December of 2022, the board approved OPPD's near-term generation, informed by the MISO winter PRM, but not having exact clarity to the SPP winter PRM. That study had assumed a 15% winter PRM in 2024, a 20% in 2025, and a 25% in 2026. So it was
Really quick, just to clarify, I think you said the board approved the generation in December 2022. I don't think that's what you meant. We were planning for the generation portfolio that the board was eventually going to approve in August of 23.
Thank you. Yeah, the generation study had assumed those levels, but they haven't gotten to the approval. Thank you for that clarification. I apologize for that. And so we went through that evolution and we got the approval to build resources without the policy clarity of SPP's winter PRM, even though at that time directionally we knew it would move up. In August of 2024, SPP, I'll say finally, but after a good 18 to 20 months of conversation, approved the winter PRM of 36%. So we went from 15% to 36%. And I would just characterize that as lightning fast in terms of utility timelines. I got the pleasure of sitting next to Director Spurgeon at that meeting in St. Louis, and we watched that unfold together. Subsequent to that, in February 2025, SPP again increased the winter PRM from 36% to 38%, effective for the 2028-2029 season. So a lot has changed. When we say the PRM changed, it's not a specific amount at a specific point in time. It's multiple amounts at multiple points in time. And the engineers in the Southwest Power Corps are setting this PRM with a focus on safety.
So a couple of things, and I think it's important to pause here for a minute. We've been paying attention, and things have changed really, really fast. I think this is important for me to clarify and just we have very rigorous, very disciplined planners and planning processes that have been looking at the load growth. They've been looking at the requirements from the region, the plan reserve margin in the summer, now in the winter as well. We've been planning a lot of these actions. We asked our board to approve our power with purpose generation in 2019. Part of that was to allow for new load to grow. And another big part of that was to allow us to convert and refuel North Omaha Station. You can see the fast pace of change. We started hearing about, hey, by the way, SPP is now going to establish a winter season, which we didn't have an enforceable winter PRM. We started to hear of that in the 2022 timeframe. And then we also started hearing that, hey, by the way, it may be between 20 and 25% at some point in time, that PRM in the winter. Okay. At that time, in the 2022-2023 timeframe, we were already planning for another round of approvals for more generation resources because load continued to grow. This is the generation that Brad described earlier as monumental, the largest request we've had of our board, and that's about 2.5 gigawatts of new generation, and most of that is already in motion. And just just about a year and a few months ago, SPP approves not only a winter plan reserve margin season or winter season, but also the plan reserve margin was not what we anticipated to be 20 or 25%. It was 36%. The time they said, and this may go up even further. Well, sure enough, a few months later, they increased that to 38%. Now, the effective date of those two numbers are starting, the 36% starts in next winter, 2026, 2027 winter, and then 38% starting in the 2029, 2030. That is fundamentally a gigantic change. So part of the generation that we have been building, that we've built already, we talked about Turtle Creek Station came online on June 17th of this year, Standing Bear Lake Station on November 11th. We all cheered, we all happy that those stations are online. In many ways, those stations are no longer available to replace the capacity that we would lose from our North Omaha Station conversion. Was the original plan. With these increases in plan reserve margins or safety margins, as Brad described them, those stations have to be contributing to the additional reserves that we need to have in the winter time. Didn't you see that coming? Well, no. I think that's what Dan Lanihan was talking about earlier. The planners are doing the best they can, but really these changes are coming to us faster then we can react to them, and faster than we can build regeneration. I received a question a few days ago about, hey, aren't OPPD employees part of the groups in the Southwest Power Pool that set these standards? And the answer is yes, absolutely they are. Well, why did they set that standard? Well, part of it is because they're part of a group. They're engineers, and they have very high standards, professional standards. I need them to really assess the system independent of the popularity of the decision, independent of how hard the decisions might be. Tell us what you need to keep the system reliable. And I think that's an important piece that I want to mention, just because, again, the question I received about, hey, couldn't you have voted no on the 36%? It's very important for those engineers to have that independence and really make those recommendations based on engineering science that they practice.
Some of our partners in the Southwest Power Pool had been in the same position we're in. Yes. And as far as facing the same difficulties because of this rapid increase in the reserve power. Couldn't there have been a more gradual increase or something that would have not put us in this position? And again, we're obviously probably not the only ones in this position.
Yeah, so yes, there could have been a more gradual decision. I think the reason why the decision was not gradual, I think it's responsive to the urgency, right? The 2021 rolling blackouts that we all experienced, and how fast they need to incentivize the construction of new generation. And as I mentioned earlier, just yesterday, right? Southwest Power Pool publishing another study saying that the reliability of the grid continues to degrade. So in other words, there's no time to spare. And I think that's probably the reason why the changes happened fast. These were not popular changes. There was a lot of debate and discussion. You were part of that meeting, because it takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of time. It's a big change for all utilities. But ultimately the vote was to do the right thing for the system, according to what the recommendation was from the planners.
Is this an indication of poor planning in the SPP's part?
I don't know. I think it's just the rapid increase.
Are they taking that action based upon the situation in Texas? One incident? Is that what's triggering this?
No, remember, so what happened in Texas didn't only happen in Texas. It happened to us.
New Orleans
And it happened to us, right? On February 15 of 2021, we had rolling blackouts. I don't think I have a lot of respect for those planners. I've met them personally. I think they are fantastic. We have our own planners here, and I think they have some of the best, brightest planners. I think what happens here is the load is changing so fast, and a lot of the planned retirements have to change so that we can keep the lights on. And I think this is important here. We haven't even talked about the summer months. We're talking about the winter months, and the conditions in the winter months also have deteriorated. And so I think it's a way for the industry, or at least in our case, the Southwest Power Pool, to react and say we need to have a lot more resources to ensure that we have available supply.
Add to Director Kavanaugh, you make some great points, but we're talking about the electric utility, but you have a gas utilities, and you also have water. They're all going through the same thing with the weather changes that we've seen. The freezing of that river that occurred that took off, some of our units, that we'd never seen before. Neither had the water industry. What happened down in Texas when they were building the compressor stations? They look at what are the heating and cooling degree days when they make everything that they do out there. What's the temperatures that they are? Those temperatures just blew away anything that they designed for, and that happens in the HVAC world too, right? You make your assumptions based off the best information that you have, and you design the systems off of that. And so, the engineers that are looking at that, they're looking at the health, the well-being, and the safety of the public all the time. And so as those design, I don't know how many times we've heard use the word unprecedented, right? Floods, straight line winds, all of these different things. it has caused our utilities in general to have to look at the way we're designing differently. And so it has just blown away in the last 3 to 5 years. We've seen things we've never seen before over and over and over again. And so it does make you pause when you're designing to look at a new way of designing.
That's why you see so many steel structures now in our footprint, right? That's why we are designing the new plants to operate at much lower temperatures than most utilities. So we're taking those efforts to harden for that very reason. It takes a while to move through that.
I think the question helps me recall that in 2020, demand across the country really truncated. It dropped compared to COVID. And that led into a little bit of 21. And then in 22 and 23, you started to have to pick up again, kind of a resurgence of this whole. And so that's also a part of this, right? Dan talked about the speed and magnitude. And that's a big challenge.
Sir, quick question on this slide. That 809 that I'm looking at August 24, is that's the 36%, right? So we've got our peak winter demand, and then 809 is what we need in order to meet that new planning reserve margin, right?
Correct.
So for me, I'm just trying to put it in context. Turtle Creek, Standing Bear, and then Turtle Creek Edition, I think, are 825 and 10.
675.
We'll go back 2 slides, 600 plus 225.
He's talking about the third unit.
Yeah, I'm just trying to put all this in context.
Yeah.
In terms of-
600 Turtle Creek and Standing Bird together.
That's 225 for the new Turtle Creek.
Yep.
Right, so I'm just trying to wrap my head around that number as it relates to what we're building and what the plans were originally and where we are now. Okay, thank you.
So as we kind of wind down the reliability and grid resilience piece of this conversation, Troy clearly laid out the extent of the transmission constraints we're dealing with and how they've intensified the low voltage occurrences and the increase in frequency on those. And just in general, the system margins continue to decrease. That's what the new infrastructure is for, and it'll make a big difference when it arrives. But we think about North Omaha as being a very unique tool to the operators to be able to deal with the demands that the system puts on them. Let's go ahead and look at the affordability piece of this conversation.
Right. I think this is the end of our resource planning section. Is that right? From here to
Sure, you can say
building and
that.
environmental.
Sure, you can say that.
So I guess one of the questions I had in looking back at our SD9 integrated systems planning strategic directive and previous reports, we talk often about modeling and the metrics that we use to determine reliability. And so the last 3 years, we've referenced the frequency basis and energy basis projections, including the near-term generation resources, both power with purpose and near-term generation resources. And so I guess I'm curious, do we have a projection on what we expect on our system moving forward for frequency or energy basis reliability, given the potential refueling retirement at North Omaha Station?
What I recall from the monitoring report, which is incomplete, I don't exactly remember the monitor. But my recollection is that when the near-term generation goes in service, the requirements the board had for system metrics, for lack of a better term, are expected to be satisfied. That's the expectation based on that data set at that time with that analysis.
And have we done updated modeling with new data and different analysis now?
It's as I think have been observed, it's always changing. We would pick up the next round of that when it comes to the next monitoring. And then we look at circuit specific and segment specific information on the transmission or distribution system based on those customer impacts that are occurring in real time.
Your ISP will identify a lot of this, right? So in 2026,
Sure.
You should have a plan laid out after going through that.
Yeah. And maybe for the benefit of folks, we're calling kind of our new IRP, the ISP, the Integrated System Plan. And the idea behind the title change is we were able to broaden the conversation to include the distribution and transmission system in addition to the supply and demand reduction options that are available to us. And I think you had brought up a comment earlier, Director Williams, around what's the options here and how do we think about some of these things on the distribution system. And Dan's going to lead us into a high resolution look at that piece of our system next year, which will be open for a lot of public comment.
Yeah, and I guess the question is mostly, so we don't have updated modeling right now about a change in expected reliability based on current system conditions.
The best information we have that's irrefutable is real-time operations, and that's what's being recapped today.
What our operators are seeing in real time, they're capturing it and they're shifting it over to the planning group for them to think about for their modeling and kind of next steps. So there's a feedback loop that goes between those groups. Very similar with SPP. There's a feedback loop that goes from OPPD to Southwest Power Pool as they're planning the broader system to help make sure that we are modeling that it's as good of a model as it could possibly be and captures as much potential as it can be.
So just to level set, this was in systems, but I've got the timeline for the ISP pulled up. The initial results completed and presented will be in August of 26. So just so that we're all aware of the timeline is there. Well, but, you know.
There'll be a number of outreach events in advance of that.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Yep.
Yeah, I just wanted to hang the hat on like outcomes.
Okay.
Of it.
Yep. Okay, not hearing any more questions. We had a conversation earlier around the incremental financial resources we're going to need to give the system outcomes that our customers are wanting. And so affordability and financial impact continues to be first and foremost in the minds of our customers. We could go to the next slide. It's a publication from the Southwest Power Pool. For those that weren't able to attend the corporate operating plan discussion, I'll just briefly characterize this slide. What cost us $1.7 million in 2021 for a line mile of 345 kilovolt of transmission now costs us $4.4 million. And so that's a 2.5 times increase for each mile of 345 that we built. And Troy discussed how many miles we're planning to build. So the cost commitment from us for the required infrastructure is rising considerably year over year due to many factors. The second data point is 138,000 kilovolt line. In 2021, it costs about 400,000 to build a line mile. In 2025, it costs approximately 2.2 million for line mile. That's a 5x jump. That's very considerable. A lot of cost pressures for the same quantity of electrical infrastructure. And so we're navigating this, and so are the rest of the utilities. But it is having an impact on our cost profile.
Just to highlight one thing there, Brad, of the 400 miles that was discussed earlier, some of that is replacement of aging infrastructure. So it's not just all new. It adds capacity, but it's replacement of things that need to be replaced. And so a lot of times we just think that it's because of growth, but there's asset management that's in that also.
So in addition to the higher cost to build more infrastructure solutions, which we're honored to do for our community, the next slide outlines the timeline that it takes to get things in service. And so I apologize for the redundancy, but again, for those that weren't able to participate earlier this morning, the top set of, I'll say, steps for the Southwest Power Pool are lined out for accreditation. So what is this resource worth in terms of your ability to count it against your load? The generation interconnection request. So if somebody wants to connect onto the system. I believe it's above 10 megawatts. They have to go through a generation interconnection study to make sure that the system can support the incremental injection coming from that supply resource. The generation interconnection studies that are associated with that, as I mentioned, and then the generation interconnection agreement, which is an agreement between the generating customer, the interconnecting customer, and the Southwest Power Pool and the transmission owners. That is sort of the culmination of the regulatory green light to inject new electrical supply into the system. And then at the same time, or shortly after that, it's probably more intuitive to people, which is your build process. So the first kind of bullet there for utilities and generators are you would kind of go through this integrated resource plan. You would decide what you're going to build, where you're going to build it, the quantity that you're going to build, the cost that it's going to take to build, the directional rate impact, and you would advance through your regulatory approvals, which for the OPPD organization is the OPPD board, as well as the Power Review Board, Nebraska Power Review Board in Lincoln. You would go out for a major commercial evolution. You would request proposals for the asset types and the quantities that you were after. And you would secure land and materials. You would start construction. And then ultimately, when that asset goes commercial operations, you would start injecting into the system, assuming your generation interconnection status was satisfactory.
I think it's important to also talk about the secure land and materials. Brad, you talked about the construction piece. Earlier this afternoon, we received reports from our team about all the natural gas generation construction that's happening and the solar construction that's happening. I think it's important for us to pause here for a little bit because there are many challenges in terms of timing and costs. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about securing land, in this case, planning and zoning approvals for us to build renewable generation. That has been an enormous challenge that is setting Nebraska back by years. And I didn't want to leave this slide without saying that. The decisions that have been made at the local county commission level, establishing setbacks that are impossible to work with, have resulted in a significant delay of us being able to bring in new electrons into the system. So it's not just natural gas. It's not a particular part of the generation. This affects every single generation type. You can sense my frustration here, but I am frustrated because there is a lot of generation that we still need to build and site and energize that requires that planning and zoning approval for land, especially for solar generation.
Thank you. If we go to the next slide, we're talking about affordability here. And there are financial implications with a change in direction of the facility potentially. And so while this conversation has largely focused around energy availability, energy reliability, and getting the outcomes that we all need for modern life, here is a slide summarizing the financial impact. And so I'm going to start with that third bullet point first. The way we derive these numbers is we have best in class grid simulators from a computer software application. And what happens is we put in, as the slide says, the capital costs that are associated to run a generator. We put in the fixed O&M, which would generally be staff. We put in the
operating and management expense.
Yep, thank you. We put in the variable O&M, which would be fuel, any sort of commodity that's used to clean and manage emissions. Basically, we fully load the cost of the generator. The dispatch software simulates the dispatch for that generator in the marketplace the same way SPP uses their dispatch logic And so that creates a market revenue profile. In addition to that, we have customers that are very excited for electrical service. And so there is an aspect of this that includes load. And depending on the duration of a potential facility extension, it yields two different orders of magnitude. The first one is a hypothetical at this point 5-year extension, which would lower the net operating cost of the portfolio by $36 million in terms of net present value. And the second one is a longer duration, just so we understand kind of the difference between maybe a shorter versus a longer. And that's I'm gonna approximate $440 million of net present value savings for customers. If the natural question at this point is, what does that mean in terms of rates? And so it depends on what occurs in the marketplace for that year that the facility is potentially running. But we would estimate the annual rate increase to be approximately 1 to 3% favorable. So that would be 1 to 3% lower rates than would otherwise occur, dependent upon the accuracy of some of those inputs. This is something that we do for integrated resource plans. It's something we do every year to derive budgets, both for fuel and for net power costs. And so this is a muscle, just like the budgeting process that is mature. We continue to invest in it and make improvements. But this is something we do fairly frequently, is analyze these types of things.
Hey Brad, why is year 6 through 15 so much higher than the first 5 years? Is that anticipated?
Yeah.
Maintenance?
It's a great question. In the event the facility is extended, there is a fair amount of capital that will go into the facility to ensure reliable operations. The longer you run the asset, based on a constant amount of capital, it will extract the value of your capital investment more the longer you run it. The other piece of this, as I mentioned, is there's a load aspect for this. So if you intend to run the facility a little bit longer, it allows more load to come on, while the rest of those resources that we're pursuing, that Troy went over, the 200 miles of transmission and the approximate 2,500 megawatts of new supply, can come into service. And so it's really driven on duration of run relative to how much value you're getting out of the CapEx that you have to invest, as well as the load.
So the financial information that we see on screen, it's broken down into several different categories. Do we have numbers attributed to each of those categories? O&M, production cost, market revenue, retail revenue?
We do have numbers. Some of these inputs are competitively sensitive, and so we try to review that with the board in the appropriate environment. I hope that helps. Maybe I missed your question.
We have provided that information directly to board members. I think that's important for the public to know. And we've gone through quite a bit of detail, a lot more detail than what's presented in here. I think your question is, can we make that available to the public?
Yeah.
And I think there might be some sensitivity, but I think we can look into how can we aggregate some of these numbers and potentially make them available to the public without compromising competitively sensitive information.
Yeah, and I guess by extension, can you share information about the assumptions that went into the financial breakdown? We're talking about market revenue, retail revenue. We talked earlier about the capacity factor of the current units and the way they've operated in the past. What do we assume about operational status moving forward over 5 to 15-year periods?
Yeah. So the primary inputs for this were derived from the latest fact set that we had available. And so we have a number of providers that promulgate natural gas prices. We have a weighting mechanism that projects the forward gas prices. We have a mechanism that projects power prices. We know the FOM and VOM of our assets and the CapEx that's going to be required. And so those are kind of the types of things that go into it. Anything more than that, we've kind of discussed in the other setting with with board members. And so I hope that's helpful.
Sorry, maybe I missed that. Was that included in one of the presentations?
It's diligent under, we have a book called Strategic Risk, Resource Adequacy.
The one page breakdown slide?
No,
These are new.
it's a little bit.
Okay, I'll look, input this. Okay, great. Thank you. I will look back for that additional slide.
Okay.
Before we move, I think it's, there's a reason for that picture. Can we have been working hard to complete the conversion of the station on time, as scheduled, December of 2026. I think it's important for us to also talk about, you can see here work that was done a couple of years ago and into last year, installing a boiler on the engine room. This was important, and it would be necessary if all the units, units 1 through 3 would not be online, and then units 4 and 5 would be on gas, which means that they would be offline during the winter. To prevent the engine room from freezing, we needed to install a boiler, an electrical boiler. When the units are operating on coal, then the natural heat from the station keeps the station warm and avoids freezing. But what you can see in there is work that happened in the past few years, getting us ready for the conversion. That electrical boiler has been completed. I believe it's ready to go. There are other investments that we have. We had to order natural gas burners for Unit 5. We have them on site, ready to be installed. We have currently invested about $17.2 million on work leading us to the conversion. And I think that's very important. One, to show the public that the intention, and still to this day, my instructions are to retire and convert the station on December of 2026. What would we do if the decision were to be to extend the station? Well, what do we do with the equipment we have? Do we store it? Can we sell it? Can we reuse it? I think that's important for us to just talk briefly. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
It's a good point. I think most of this equipment we would keep until we have certainty of what the long-term outcome of North Omaha would be. So we would store it in a way that we keep it in good shape, that it wouldn't be damaged. So yeah, that's the way we would treat the infrastructure.
Sorry, one final question, since it looks like we're shifting from financial to environment and health.
Yeah.
In cases where we have decisions of significant magnitude, like $440 million, we often seek external expert opinions, and we have external help on resource modeling for our ISP. Do we have any external review of the financial information that could be provided to board members to help us verify that we know the information we've received is accurate and best available?
That's a good question. A lot of the inputs that are used in the analysis are reviewed by the Brattle organization as a part of our annual review process that we use Brattle for. But I don't think all of them would have been. We had estimates from the engineers in terms of how much capital would need to be invested from those folks that know the station the best. And so aspects of it were and aspects of it weren't. We did not submit it to anybody for external review, primarily for the reasons I shared, which is this is something that we commonly do that we feel very comfortable doing. So,
thanks.
Sure. Kind of wrapping up the affordability and mitigating steeper rate increase conversation before Cliff comes up. We've talked about how rates are increasing both at OPPD and across the country. We've identified that customers still continue to be very sensitive to the bill. And we understand that and we want to keep that front of mind. If we convert North Omaha Station, we'll be more exposed to market price of power. And the way that moves is what we'll wear as far as implications financially to us. we must balance this idea of environmental goals with affordability, with reliability for all of our customer owners here in the service territory. And again, any sort of potential extension for North Omaha Station in its current state would generally provide 1 to 3% of rate relief, depending on the quantity of years and what occurs in that year. Just some concluding thoughts. Turn it over to Cliff Fleener, my colleague on the executive.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Brad. Good afternoon. I'd like to share with everyone a few thoughts on some of our insights and information on how we view emissions from the North Omaha Station at OPPD and the sincere concerns of our wider community. Next slide, please. First, I want to start that we listen to the concerns of our public and our employees regarding North Omaha emissions. We're part of the community. We have employees that work at the plant, obviously. We also have them that live in the North Omaha area. And under SD7, we have our commitment to environmental justice. We need the community, and we attempt to be true to that guidance. We review pertinent information on our emissions, including data cited by the community, and we review it. We review it carefully and concisely, not with the intent to refute or to engage in any kind of back and forth, but to better learn and understand where they're coming from. And also, because we do not have all the answers, our mind is subject to change based upon new information that comes forward. We use observational data to gain a better perspective on the situation. Observational data is valid information. It may not be conclusive, but it helps to paint a picture and give context. It could be a comparable risk associated with a particular site. It could be some additional data provided from throughout the community. Because we have a commitment through our environmental justice program to go beyond compliance when it looks at impacts to the community, we conducted a detailed, objective, and site-specific and repeatable risk assessment for North Omaha Station using US EPA methodology, toxicity factors, and thresholds to get a better picture of what our impact to the North Omaha community is. Why have we done this? This is a core part of our values. We have a passion to serve. We want to honor our community, and we care about each other. We view ourselves as very much as part of the community, and we view people that testify at our various meetings not as our adversaries, but as part of our community, people we work to serve. And because the board needs the best possible information to guide their decision whether or not we choose to extend or to decommission of the North Omaha Station, and they need the best data possible. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk a little bit now about our emissions at the site. Obviously, district-wide, we've mentioned this several other meetings in the past. We have seen a period of great load growth, about 19% since 2013. We've had a 42% reduction in absolute emissions, which has yielded about a 50% reduction in our carbon intensity. Looking at North Omaha specifically from 2013 to 2024, sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxide are down by more than 40%. Mercury is down by 90%. And North Omaha Station's units 4 and 5 both hold low emitter status for particulate matter, hydrochloric acid, and mercury. And that means that we're more than 50% below the threshold that we're regulated by. Now, to be sure, if we continue to keep the North Omaha Station running, we will continue to see emissions at a higher level. We expect to see 1.6 million tons in CO2, additional CO2 that would have been removed if we decommissioned the site going forward until the transition could be complete.
And that is about the amount of CO2 that we currently observe at the station. So there's no change in the capacity of the station. We wouldn't be doing anything different than we do today. So this is what we estimate the station emits today.
Yeah. Extended forward into the future.
Over a year.
Yes. Oh, into the future. It was very hard to predict, but I didn't want to put a bar. I went out 10 years that was flat. It's not accurate, but we're 1.6 million fewer tons would be emitted if we transitioned.
This is a very important point. I want to just pause here because so far we've been talking about risks of converting the station. We talked about reliability and resilience and affordability. topics. We're gonna talk about availability of power for customers. But there's another side of the coin, and this is on SD7. We do have an interim metric that says by 2027, the North Omaha Station is going to reduce carbon emissions by 3.5 million metric tons. So not converting the station affects that goal. That's why this decision is not as straightforward as it would seem. There's obviously that environmental. Sounds obvious, but I think it's important for us to talk about that. There are pros on both sides of the equation. And it's gonna be up to board members to decide how do you evaluate pros and risks on each one.
Switch to the next slide, please. I'm gonna give an example of some observational data. I'll start by just defining terms and explain what you're seeing up there. You're gonna see something here called Purple Air. Purple Air is a company that sells monitoring devices for use at your home. Anyone in this room can choose to purchase a Purple Air monitor, have it installed at their track the amount of PM 2.5, that's particulate matter 2.5 microns. That's formed to be a key pollutant. A couple of years ago, community groups encouraged, and we were supportive of the promotion of Purple Air monitors being installed across the community. Right now, there are 11 Purple Air monitors that are currently operating within the Omaha area. They're listed here. The nearest one is about 1.5 miles northwest of the site. It's in a darker purple on that picture right there. We looked at the last 2 years of data because all of the data is available online and available to anyone that'd like to download it. On the graph, you can see there the blue line or the green line is the average of all of the monitors averaged together. The blue line is the monitor in Florence. What we find is that there is no significant difference between the North Omaha, the site, or excuse me, the purple monitor closest to the North Omaha facility and the other monitors throughout the community. It's actually slightly less, but we're being conservative, assuming that it's no different substantially. The two purple bars you see on the bottom just reflect when we've had some Canadian wildfires impact on the site. You can see how it elevates. When you really dig into the data, you can see surges around 4th of July, unsurprisingly. I think the important here to point out is it's one data point that indicates that at least as far as these meters are concerned, we don't have an excess amount of 2.5 at that meter at 1.5 from the site. Again, is it conclusive? No, but it's an information worth considering as we look at the impacts of the site. Next slide, forward, please. I'm gonna talk a little bit about the human health and economic risk assessment that we have contracted with. We contracted with two firms, EPRI, the Electric Power Research Institute, and AECOM, a global consulting firm. They have a sizable risk assessment group that works out of Massachusetts with a great deal of expertise in these processes. The risk assessment uses tools and methodology developed by EPA to be used in agency decision-making. This type of methodology is used at all Superfund sites in the United States. The US EPA uses the same methodology to develop the effectiveness of their rules. This methodology is used widely internationally, including places like Australia, the EU, and EU member states. The assessments are tiered, well-respected, and repeatable. So you can repeat this data. We did not choose any of the parameters other than to request that the more conservative parameters be used. So all of these requirements, all of the methodologies, all the toxicity factors are effectively dictated by the EPA process. In alignment, as I mentioned before, with our commitment to environmental justice and SD7, we're required to go beyond basic regulatory compliance. We're not required to do this. We decided to do this, and there was some risk. If we had done this and there would have been an exceedance beyond the first tier or a second tier or a third tier, we'd have to do some immediate action and inform the community and potentially regulators as well. The study looks at three components: inhalation, simply straightforward inhalation, multi-pathway risks, and ecological risks. Inhalation is just as it stands, inhalation of pollutants from the site. It looks at cancer risk, and it also looks at acute and chronic exposures. The multi-pathway assessment goes far beyond. It includes inhalation. It also includes air deposition on community gardens, on fish that might be consumed in local lakes, dermal contact, incidental ingestion of soil. in the area, and it looks at all organs and all organ pathways from reproductive to pituitary to respiratory. It's very rigorous. They used 2019 data in the assessment. We used 2019 because it was a period of higher capacity emissions. For the North Omaha site, we use conservative terrain and downwash effects. With that, a downwash effect is when you have emissions coming from the stacks, it pushes pollutants closer to the ground, so there's more exposure. We use
Cliff, quickly
Yes.
on that. So we have data all the way out to last year. In fact, we have data as of yesterday. That information that was shared with this organization, they looked at everything and they said, okay, 2019 is probably the worst year. Let's test that
exactly.
and screen that out. And I think this is important because I have received questions in the past. Well, have you looked into the past? Well, can't look 20 years, but we did look into the past. And in fact, the study selected a date that was 6 years ago.
Yep.
As a good barometer. So if that one screens out, that means that more recent years would screen out as well.
Absolutely. We wanted to be more conservative, and we asked that our risk assessors do just exactly that. We wanted to make sure that we gave all the attention we possibly could to determine if there was any impacts. So using the more conservative data that helps us in that regard. It evaluates contaminants of potential concern. There are 68 of them. They were developed by peer-reviewed science, both by EPA, and we use California EPA toxicity factors in this project. And we assumes exposure. When we compare exposure for cancer rates, it assumes 70-year lifespan. So from birth to 70 years, pretty much continuous exposure to the contaminants in that particular period. So that's also a very conservative aspect of this study. We feel is objective. It uses EPA methodology and tools that are used across the United States on a regular basis. They're trial tested, they're solid, they're repeatable. And of course, we had it done independently. We use site-specific data. We use airport meteorological data, which is an important component. 2020 census tract data to look at the populations when identifying receptors around the plant. And we focused on residential, adult, and child exposures. There's different types of receptors. An industrial worker receptor is a little bit more robust. They assume PPE and other protective equipment. We went with the more vulnerable populations, which is children and families living near the facility. Next slide, please. Now, here are the initial results that we've received. First, I want to talk a little bit about the max cancer risk. The standard that EPA has for health is one additional case in cancer per million people over a 70-year time frame. Our screening level came out at 0.38, which is well below the screening threshold of 1. If you convert that, that means it was one for us, for this site, based on this data, there was one additional cancer case per 2.6 million people. Just to put this into consideration, if you smoke one cigarette, that increases probability of cancer by 1 to 100,000. We look at the chronic hazard index and acute hazard quotient, which looks at exposure for other illnesses besides cancer, asthma, other items. We screened out at 0.07 on the chronic hazard index. And for the acute hazard quotient index, we screened out at 0.002. To put the 0.002 into comparison, someone that would eat fish on a weekly basis that had mercury, typically they score between 0.2 to 0.5 in that category on the same EPA risk thresholds. Higher than what we have here, still protective of human health, but it gives you some perspective. We've also included in the purple box, this is in the observational category. This just puts into consideration some of the risks that we encounter every day on an annual basis. About 120 people per million are killed every year in automobiles. 56 people per million die due to secondhand smoke. Ladders, accidents, and bicycles are 0.5 and 4 million, or 4 per $1 million population per year, just as an example of some typical risks that we encounter every day. The comparative inhalation risks from the cancer and chronic non-cancer and acute exposures were below EPA thresholds. The health risks for the multi-pathway also were below. And the environmental risks. We looked at an assessment about the impacts to flora and fauna, plant species, aquatic life, terrestrial wildlife, all of them screened behind or below the EPA screening thresholds. Based on this data, North Omaha Stations 4 and 5 did not propose a significant risk to the public or environment as defined, public or environment. US EPA Protection Agency. And I think it's important that we use the EPA's thresholds for risk. They're exceptionally conservative and they're making an appropriate standard, and the data that they're based upon is highly peer reviewed and tested. If there's no questions on it. Yes, sir.
This study, I think we had preliminary results and then you said it was going to be peer reviewed. Is that right?
Yeah, let me be clear. The toxicity factors and the thresholds and the methodology as itself, including model, were all produced from peer reviewed science.
Oh, okay.
The modeling process you see here has not been through a separate peer review, but it is repeatable. So the results of this can be shared and repeated. So I hope that explains what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that's a good clarification. And how much of the study are we planning to make available to the public?
I was planning to make the entire study available plus a 2-page item to explain it in layman's terms for some people so that the general population gets a good feel for what this means comparatively, because frankly, it's rather complex. And I think people will have both, so you can make up your mind about if we're translating it correctly. But the entirety of the report and the data tables will be provided for public review, as well as a 2-pager assessment and summary.
Okay, thank you. EPA screening thresholds, help me understand how frequently those are changing. Are those things that go up and down? Do they consistently go down over time? Like, what does that look like?
They have traditionally gone down over time. The US EPA uses I wish I could remember the name of the scientific screening board. They have a scientific review committee of top scientists that meet regularly to review this data around these thresholds, to review how appropriate they are. This has been a long process. EPA started doing risk thresholds as early as the early 80s. The methodologies that you see here were first rolled out in 2005, and they have been continuously updated, as have been the data. And generally speaking, yes, they are going down. And I've worked at a number of Superfund sites where you think you're going to make it, and then the standard changes because of new data, because of new requirements that come in that lower the threshold. I'm going to go give you an example. I used to do a lot of arsenic cleanups a long time ago. 100 ppm was the standard. It changed to 40. In the middle of our item because of part of these regular reviews. And these reviews are done by top scientists, independent, based on the latest, best available data. So it's always getting more granular and more detailed, and typically lower thresholds over time.
I've gotten questions and comments from customer owners about another screening tool called Cobra.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that and how that relates to these or not?
I really appreciate that question. That's the co-benefits risk assessment. Co-benefits risk assessment was established in 2001. It was really originally designed as a tool to compare the benefits of renewables in terms of costs versus, say, fossil generation. And you can plug in information on what industry you're in, the type of emissions, the location state, and it will produce for you a number of costs. It includes things like deaths, numbers lost time cases, costs associated with it. Any normal person, any person that would want to take a look at that could easily see it when they run it and say, oh my gosh, this yields 14 deaths or 20 deaths. This is serious because of that term. There is on the website a disclaimer that explains that both the response to deaths and harm do not recognize actual harm. There's statistical simulations, and it recommends that if you're concerned about the environmental quality of a particular area, to do a full-scale human health risk assessment. That's exactly what we've done here. The Cobra is not competing with what we're doing. It's 2 separate items telling 2 different blocks of information, and Cobra recommends that you do exactly what we have done. So I really appreciate they saying that, because that gets quoted often. They're complementary, they're not versus.
So we took a step further.
Yes.
What would have happened if, let's say, these numbers were not what they are and they were worse than the screening threshold?
The first thing we'd have to do would be look at the next plan, which would be either additional sampling in that particular area. We would be obviously contacting ELT and consulting with the board about what our next steps would be. We would have to do a whole additional rank of additional tests. And this is tiered specifically so that you can go through, as you cross each tier, you move down to a greater degree of specificity and detail. We would be contacting the board to explain what would happen, and we would take steps to both further study and then zero in to find a solution for the particular risk. And then also as it gets tiered, it zeroes in on more specific risks. So it might zero on a particular constituent, a specific circumstance. So you might tailor a specific solution to target that. There would be action taken for sure.
And if I may, I think this is from a personal side of things, when I hear customers concern, empathize, and it's legitimate concerns and perceptions. That's very, very important. It was very important for me to have this type of information, to know using established methodologies and paying good money for these type of assessments. Do the risk assessment. If it comes out and says we need to do something to improve the outcome, I would have been the first one to say we need to do something. I think this was important, at least for me, and I think I'm speaking for the rest of the whole team. We're all moms and dads. Some of us actually have spouses who work at the power plant day in and day out. And it was very important for us to know, not only have we historically complied with all the EPA regulations, but let's go one step further and let's do this assessment to see what are the effects on human health and the environment. I think it's important. It's not, again, not to refute the perception and the concern of a customer owner, but it was important for us to know how the station and the emissions of the station may or may not be affecting that.
Agreed. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's based on 2019 data.
Emissions data.
Emissions data, and they chose that because that was the worst year available.
Yeah.
And it looked at a person's lifespan over the course of 70 years. So that's sort of using that data to say if these were the consistent emissions, this would be the impact on somebody over the course of 70 years, right? The risk of stating the obvious, the plant has become cleaner over time. So help me understand what, like, I'm not going to ask you to pontificate on what these numbers might have been 30 years ago, but I would appreciate some narrative around that so that I can, and again, like, this is a question about going forward. I get that, but I want to understand what the history is a little bit. What's happened over the course of decades of running that facility that has gotten us to a place where the numbers are as low as they are, where we're in low emitter status? Like, I don't need all the detail, but just kind of help me understand it a little bit.
We've added environmental equipment.
Scrub coal, right?
It's ACI, VCI, but basically it reduces NOx, SOx.
Reducing the pollutants.
Yeah, so it's, and I think you had a slide on information at one time.
Yeah, so not even 20 years ago. I mean, 2014 was the date of the decision, and we converted in 2016. So you go back a decade ago, you had 5 units on coal all the time.
Yep.
Today we only have 2. That's significantly, and then on the remaining 2, we've invested in scrubbers and other technology, and we continue to invest in better quality coal.
I wouldn't call it scrubbers because that's
sorry.
Yeah.
I should say also over the years, there was opacity alarms that are being sent. You know, so you have managers calling the control rooms and they're making adjustments and stuff like that. If you go back 10 years ago, those alarms were happening often, and because of the activated carbon, dry sorbent injection, all this other stuff that was going on and all the things that they were working on and teaching them, it got better as they went along. If that helps too, to add to everything that Troy was saying, it was correct in there too.
Thank you.
No, there have been significant changes in that space.
I might add that the National Ambient Air Quality Standards have been in effect for a lot longer than 30 years. And at no time has that area, or really any area near it, exceeded any of those standards. So that's another factor to bear in mind if you're going back in time.
There's fairly operational improvements as well tied around just making it more efficient, just trying to lower costs. That also tends to lower emissions over time. And, you know, everything's gotten cleaner. You know, if you go back to 1970, there was leaded gas as well. I mean, it's been a trend that the whole country's been on for a number of years on multiple facets, thanks to a lot of good regulation and technological.
Sure. Thank you. This helps me understand current state. We don't know what the future of the plan is, right? It's got a limited life. We don't know exactly how long that is, but thinking about an extension. Are there additional things we can do to continue to drive these numbers down? I'll ask separately, are they cost, I mean, are they reasonable from a cost standpoint? I'm just curious about, I don't know the details of what sort of technologies are still available.
Cliff might have better.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've looked at some thoughts on further pollution, like large scale pollution controls being generally cost prohibitive. There's a lot of smaller improvements, and that's what we've tried to pioneer and launch to a greater extent, is capturing process improvements and tracking improvements on a smaller level that we can cascade up. So we're always committed to try to work to improve efficiency, working with green teams and with Troy's team to improve the operational efficiency. I think the initial looks at adding additional large scale pollution control equipment would be extraordinarily expensive and perhaps cost prohibitive. On the top of my head, I don't have the numbers. We've had discussions with my team about this and something, because I've asked them the same thing. Could we slap additional controls on there and have it make sense? And the answer I've seen at that particular site is that the cost would be extraordinarily prohibitive, especially if we're only going to run it we're not going to run it for 30 years. You know, run it for some period amount less.
Fair enough. I mean, other board members, I'm just one, but I would be curious to understand what some of those things are. I'm thinking about the net, how it relates to the net present value, the $400+ million that like financially beneficial to us. So I'd just like to have my head wrapped around some of those things. I don't need 3 quotes from different vendors and that kind of stuff, but I'd love to understand a little bit.
We'll work
And the timing, right? How long would it take for those things?
Yeah, totally. Yep.
So regarding the study, we mentioned that this is a 2-slide summary of interim information. When do we anticipate the study being completed and available?
Plan to release it on Monday?
It's coming Monday.
Yes. And that will include the 2-pager.
I will make it available then. OPPD.
On OPPD, we'll work with it. Any comments, people, we'll put it on. I imagine we'll put it online initially. Any other questions on the slide? Very good. Let's go to the next slide. A lot of this has already been covered, I think, very clearly by Brad and Troy. I'll just mention that I think one of the best innovations that our board has made, SD7, is to broaden the co-equal importance of resilience along with carbon reductions. I think that's particularly important. Long-term carbon reductions, we're still very much committed to it. It's important for future generations, but we have to make sure that we're protective, of people that are alive. We've talked quite a bit about Winter Storm Uri. People talked about the number of deaths, about 246 people. Most of them died from either exposure or from trying to stay warm, using grills or other devices to try to stay warm once they lost power. To be specific, since 2020, we've had 15 severe weather events defined as tornadoes, thunderstorms, heat domes, flooding, etc. We've all lived through that. That compares to a period from 2010 to 2019 period, which we had 7 key events. So there's clearly getting more severe with time. I think climate change will likely drive an increase in these events going forward. We've talked a lot about the lack of availability to gas during the winter for the site. I'm not going to overblow this and say that if we transition North Omaha, that the lights will go out. That's not necessarily true. We can extend North Omaha and it could still be taken out due to ice jams, or there are other reasons that could drive a particular blackout. But if you look, by taking that 300 odd megawatts off the system, it creates a reduced reliability margins for us moving into the winter months, and being able to protect folks and provide people as much resiliency as we can in the face of climate change is an important health consideration that I think is worth it.
I've had many conversations with board members about this topic, and it's very important for us to remember that it's been 3 winters in a row, and I'm talking real wood here, that Hopefully this winter is not the case, but 3 winters in a row where that station has not been available for a few days. Even though the coal is there and the station is there, there's no water in the river. And I think it speaks to that piece, right? That resilience as the weather climate has changed on us. It has affected many operations in the district, including the station. So then the conundrum is, well, why do you keep the station and extend that station if it's not available? Well, it's available for the rest of the winter. Certainly it has risks. If the station, either river is not available, water in the river is not available, or the station itself is too old and starts breaking down, the accreditation capacity from the Southwest Power Pool is going to start going down. There are new standards within the Southwest Power Pool that are going to say, you know, your station, it may be a coal power plant, but it's not available when we need it the most. It's going to start receiving lower and lower accreditation levels. This is something that we need to keep an eye on. And if the board decides to extend, this will be one of the most important aspects of that we need to monitor. Because at some point, the station itself, it may not be providing the benefit, the reliability, and the resilient benefit that we just spent the past 2 hours talking about. So I didn't want to skip from this slide without addressing that issue. But virtually no source of generation, no technology is free from risks, and certainly that power plant has experienced its own risks here very recently.
Slide, please. We'll just wrap it up with the next slide. Just to wrap up, North Omaha Stations 4 and 5. The criteria do not present significant risk to public or environmental health as defined by US EPA standards. Human health risks are below standard thresholds, and continued operations at North Omaha 4 and 5 are all below US thresholds. Regional air quality, we meet ambient air quality standards, as Steve has mentioned. The impacts of climate change are happening faster than carbon reductions can be achieved. Adaptation is critical to protecting our community. The alignment of SD7's commitment to environmental justice will continue just to listen and pursue honest and open dialogue with our customer owners. And when this is released, I expect people to come talk to us. We'd love to have a conversation with you about the details, how it was done, the factors, etc. And I just want to emphasize, we are still committed to our net zero. I would love those 350 megawatts to come from any source of power other than coal, for the reasons we've outlined today, for at least for the interim period of time. We're recommending that it continue. But our net zero goal remains in place. We're still committed to reducing our emissions and waste, and we'll continue to strive to do just exactly that. If there's no further questions, thank you very much for your time and attention. And I will turn it over to my friend, Tim McAreevy.
Just real quick, the title of the slide says reducing emissions, protecting our community. But I just want to be clear that the consideration of extension of North Omaha Station absolutely would increase net emissions in our community.
It would continue, the 1.6 million would continue to be driven over time.
And other emissions that come from the combustion of coal.
CO2.
Not just CO2, but the other emissions.
The CO2e as well. And this is more of a long-term commitment, meaning that we haven't given up on our goals and commitments to continue to reduce emissions. This is not a cheerleading effort for coal. This is an interim basis. So the intent behind this slide was really to indicate that moving forward, we're going to continue to strive to reduce our emissions at every level we can.
Okay, but I just want,
and you're correct.
I just want to be clear that it says reducing emissions over here, but no part of the recommendation we're discussing right now is to reduce emissions. The recommendation would be to
continue. Yes, yeah, correct.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna pile on that for a moment, just because anything in doing this job, it's that I need to anchor decisions and strategic directives. And I want to just name that as it relates to the environmental justice section of SD7, it is much more than listening and pursuing open dialogue and honest conversation. It's to incorporate that into decision making. So I just want to be clear about like what the board has said, and acknowledging that this whole decision has different facets and levers and pros and cons. I just want to be clear though that like when we named SD7 and we wrung our hands about the language over and over and over again, that it's not just open and honest dialogue. It's much more than that.
And I think in the community engagement, you see that's kind of evidence of reaching out to the community, which we
sure that's a facet of it.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So,
Good afternoon, everyone. Tim McAravey, Vice President of Customer Service and Public Relations. As we contemplate the future of North Omaha Station and what that future looks like, an additional dimension that we've considered is community and economic prosperity. And from a strategic directive perspective, we see that closely aligned with Strategic Directive 11. So as we started to contemplate this dimension, I went back and reflected on the OPPD mission, which is to provide affordable, reliable, and environmentally sensitive energy services to our customers. And as I look at that, I recognize that affordable, reliable, and environmentally sensitive are adjectives that describe energy services. And it leads me to believe that in order for energy services to have to be reliable and to be affordable and to be environmentally sensitive, they first need to be available. And what I'd like to walk through is increasingly where we have situations where that is challenged. Just as we have in the reliability and grid resilience that Troy talked about, the affordability and financial impact that Brad talked about, the environmental and health assessment and impact that Cliff talked about, we examine both and look at this both from a local, a regional, and a national perspective. And this has also been, we heard earlier that this has been a long discussed topic. What I'm about to talk about has also been long discussed. You saw earlier on the timeline that we recognize the period of load growth. And it's been really the last 3 years in particular where we have been particularly challenged to give certainty of timeline of service to particularly large loads. And what we've seen over that time period is that has attracted more attention of local, regional, and state, and in fact, national state government or government bodies and economic development affairs. So, for example, the Ex-Arban Foundation worked with Development Counselors International to review Nebraska's economy and produced it in a publication called the Nebraska's Economic Review that was published in August of this year. And it cites a couple of quotes. It's a long report. It's publicly available. The lack of growth in employment and wages has slowed the state's economy. Now, I'm not here to suggest that that is solely attributable to the challenge sometimes in serving very large load, but it is a contributing factor in a growing number of instances. Another quote from that review is that another important consideration for companies assessing where to invest to add people and grow jobs is the access to affordable power. I would share this to signal that increasingly this phenomenon is growing, gathering additional attention. In addition, the Nebraska Chamber Foundation last year conducted a study. You see it depicted there, Nebraska's energy future. They're in fact refreshing that study this year that will also be involved in that and adding an additional dimension to it. One of the findings of that study was that the availability of affordable, reliable electricity is critical to economic development. More and more, our society depends on electricity to power its vital industries, and those industries are expanding. Nowhere is this more true than in Nebraska. And the last couple of examples I would cite around the growing importance of energy availability in our economic future is that energy and its availability has garnered the attention of the governor's office, and it's noted as one of his priorities and focus areas. And each of the three leading economic development and chambers of commerce, both Nebraska, the Greater Omaha, and the Greater Lincoln chambers, cite energy as key legislative priority areas. Aaron, you can go forward to the next slide. So I want to be clear in the depiction of this phenomenon, and that is not to say that we have not been serving additional load. You've seen that repeatedly throughout this afternoon's presentation. You saw earlier, Brad, and I think Troy talked about the growth in peak load that we have served. There are another couple of dimensions, one of which was repeated earlier. We've served 23,000 new customers, roughly equivalent to the size of Grand Island. By another comparison, another metric, we project by 28 to add 3,200 gigawatt hours of growth, roughly equivalent to the size of Lincoln Electric system. So we clearly have been serving additional load and additional growth of the economy. And what's equally clear is we're being asked to serve much more. So that rising demand has required and continues to require significant near and long-term planning. In fact, there have been a number of statistics shared, but one of many that cite the rise in electric demand. In addition to those we saw earlier was an S&P Global Commodity Study that projects that the amount of new electric load that will need to be served in the next 10 years in the US will be greater than at any 10-year period in the country's history. So by any measure, whether low, medium, or scary, the additional load required to fuel both local, regional, state, and I believe federal economies is profound. In fact, we're forecasting over 1,000 megawatts of load growth over the next 10-year period and are navigating active project requests for over 2,000 more. What that does not entail, what does not include, are what we would call inquiries. So contact, a casual contact, typically from a high energy user who now most in the industry understand that energy capacity is at a premium. We will often get inquiries that say, I have a need for 200 megawatts, so 1,000 megawatts. Is it even worth continuing to talk? And can you offer any sort of a timeline? And when that answer is no, you never know whether that would have turned into a potential economic development project or not, because they're going to go around and continue to check. So even with the forecasted load and the active projects that we're working, the load growth is profound. This again is not an OPPD phenomenon. Talk to our peers in the state, and they're experiencing some version of the same. We talk to peers around the country, and they're experiencing some version of the same phenomenon. And increasingly, businesses and community development partners are seeking answers and support. We had the chance over the past few weeks to hear from Greater Omaha Chamber leadership, and they were able to profile the requests or the RFIs or the projects that they get to work from a chamber perspective. And one of the statistics that stood out to me was of the 161 projects that they had created proposals on this year, 155 of them were high intensity energy users. So they would affirm that the nature of where the growth is right now tends to have a high correlation to high energy needs. We have continued to commit that and communicate that we're committed to delivering solutions for these folks. We continue through Brooke and her team. We continue to actively be engaged in economic development conversations so we can be at the table and make sure that we're providing accurate information and where we can help to navigate the availability to keep the project moving.
Well, Tim, hold on. We've got some mega users, and I'm not looking for any proprietary information to be shared, but I think customer owners are curious about the extent to which that big demand is coming in. We're having to expand and grow and build a lot of new things. And how have we mitigated the risk of that load going away and us holding stranded assets that run into use? I mean, the whole system's growing, so we'd eventually use it, right? But like, can you talk a little bit about how we've mitigated that risk?
I can. That has been an area that we've matured in a significant amount, and I would say are fairly mature. We're not perfect yet. And I'm going to look for Brad to add on to any comments I make, any he wants to add as well. Our two teams work exceedingly closely together. We've got internal thresholds above a certain megawatt that there's a specific process that we take customers through. And In particular, with some of the largest customers, what we're doing is looking for certain assurances along the journey as they progress to want to be able to eventually energize if we signal that we have the capacity to serve them. So that looks like application fees, applications, and we formalize that process. At a certain point, that looks like commitment for either payment or surety of infrastructure that just that new load creates on the system. So it's not socialized across the other customers. They may have the ability to earn that back over time with the achievement of loads. We would include requirements in there around them achieving a % of the load that they say they're going to bring, so that that assurance is there, that financial assurance is there. So there's a number of things that we have put in place over time and just firmed up even more over the last year or so, to especially for the very large users, to make sure that that financial backstop comes through, either through the load they actually bring or through some penalties that insulate other customers. Brad, what would you add?
A great summary, nothing further.
Okay. Thank you. Another question, if I could. You mentioned the chamber data, and I've been in a couple meetings with them where they noted the same statistics. One of the, I don't need a side-by-side comparison. That's not really what I'm looking for here, but in general terms, they've articulated that the majority of their RFIs are manufacturing related. And I don't want to show everything that is in our queue, but it doesn't seem as manufacturing heavy. It seems more data center heavy. So I'm curious about that discrepancy and whether or not there's, I mean, do we have manufacturing plus data center on top of that, which is even more?
Yeah.
Or is there, help me understand that discrepancy.
Yeah, I would, I'll go with an assist from Brooke here, but I'll give you an initial response. So I think that this in particular, the statistic I shared just a moment ago, I don't recall them specifying it to be manufacturing, but they did call it energy intensive. That often leads itself to manufacturing. I think what we see and what they would confer with us is that many of those inquiries will come through the local chambers, because they know that energy is a factor, but often employment, wage levels, availability of siting, which is all the domain of an economic development organization. And then they often would engage us around the availability of energy if that seems to be profound. What they would acknowledge, and we experience as well, is because in data related inquiries or data centers, if you will, the energy needs tend to be so outsized. Those often start with the utility.
Got it. Okay.
Because the economic development organizations, that's going to be the first call they make. So we have a new addition.
Sorry.
That's great.
He's asleep.
Often the utility would be the first stop for a data center inquiry, because they know the predominant outsized need is going to be energy. Brooke, anything you'd add?
I think you covered it well, Tim. I think our pipeline that you typically see, we're working with very mature projects at that point, whereas the chamber, as they're reporting things, it could include even inquiries and requests that aren't as far along in their site selection process. So that's what I would add to Tim's comment.
So this slide has the projection on future growth over the next 10 years at 2,000 megawatts. The number for North Omaha Station is 200. All right.
About 250 is my recollection.
250. Okay, so I guess, projecting forward over 10 years, this is not a sufficient answer to solve resource planning problems that we might anticipate in the future, right?
Not in and of itself, correct, sir.
So, I guess this is a small step toward a larger objective. Is that kind of how we do this, or how are we framing what the potential resource planning recommendation is here?
I would say it's a significant step, but I think measured by, if we're only measuring these by the megawatts we're serving, yes, it's a relatively small step, but a very important one. It's probably the one that we have the most immediate access to. But to your point, I think this is the frustration that I was sharing earlier today. We're trying to build generation. We need to build generation, and it's not fast. It's not easy. In many cases, it's our own Nebraskans sometimes not talking to each other. We all need these for the benefit of the state. These 2,000 megawatts, we measure things in megawatts. Most people measure these in jobs, in taxes, in opportunities, in prosperity, and I think that's really what's at stake here. But to your point, make no mistake, the North Omaha Station decision, while very important in the short term, is not going to solve the resource adequacy challenge we have in front of us. I think this is one. I couldn't think of a better example of an all hands on deck, all of the above technology that's required as fast as we can to serve our customers. Yeah, thank you for that.
I appreciate the question, and Javier, I appreciate the answer. I'll share a little bit more information on the next slide about what we know about jobs and prospective investment. I would also add, though, in response to your question, I also want to specify those 2,000 megawatts worth of projects are not abstract. They are not hypothetical. They are live projects with people and companies, and were we to make a decision to keep those megawatts that North Omaha generates available, there are specific projects that, on alignment with Brad's group, he creates that signal that we have available capacity. There are specific projects, specific conversations with specific projects we would have the next day. So it's very specific about we know exactly which projects that we would like to go address because of them signaling when we're ready to, when we give them the signal to progress.
So to Director Moody's point earlier, without asking for proprietary information or anything overly specific, do we have a breakdown of the projection on future slides gone? Projection on future megawatts, how it falls into residential, commercial, industrial, or that other market access 261M functionally as a separate type of rate structure? Do we know where the projected future load is in each of those kind of categories?
Yes, I will go to Brad for what I will call organic growth in residential or commercial, which is notable but modest, I think, is what we see. And what we previously signaled is that we see the bulk of the growth of net new load coming in the industrial class. And we can break that down. I think we've shared that information, obviously, in closed session, because it's had, specific company and or project names. I think it's made that available.
Yeah, the only thing I would offer is we have tried diligently to generalize the industry in public settings. And so we talk about ag processing, we talk about medical, we talk about manufacturing, we talk about defense, we talk about just these sectors of the economy. And then in executive session, we would unpack customer specific.
I think we can certainly provide a high level. I think it's important to clarify what are active project requests. Customer owner building a new home, requesting that's not part of this. So in addition to this, we have the residential load that's going. Those 23,000 new customers we've served, it's not part of the 2,000. So I think what you're asking is, let's get an understanding of how big the load request is and where are we seeing that growth. We've talked about the huge growth that we're experiencing right now in the urban, and how many of those are projects versus how many of those are smaller ones that don't qualify as a project, but we still have to serve. So I think we can certainly provide a breakdown.
Yeah, we've talked about a couple other areas where potential future policy updates might be warranted based on the projections of what we're seeing. And I guess, again, by class, residential, commercial, industrial feels like a relevant type of non-specific information that would be informative of how we can better be responsive to what we're seeing going forward, because other places have made adjustments in the way that they bring on new load, and is it necessary as we look forward at 2,000 megawatts over 10 years? That would be twice what we've seen over the last 5 years, which was already the fastest 5 years in our previous 70 years. So it feels like not only are we discussing one type of resource plan decision now, additional types of policy and planning are going to be necessary to meet another doubling. And so having an understanding of what is it we're talking about here, because again, 23,000 new homes, we've talked about 5,000 or 6,000 new residential units per year come in closer to single digit numbers of megawatts, but some of the other things come in tens and hundreds of megawatts. And so over the course of 10 years, all of the residential might be dwarfed by one single project, for example. And as we set policy and plan for the future, it's important to know the relative scope of what is it we're talking about here as we look for the large number.
Right, and just briefly, I think, yes, absolutely, I think you're spot on. Briefly, the process we have for these large active projects, we're talking 20 megawatts and higher. We have a very specific project for green lighting, right? We have different stage gates, which we allow them to come in, and we give them green lights to go forward in the next process. And that's important because at no point do we want to jeopardize our ability to serve what I'm gonna call native residential growth, the low growth that happens for families. But to your point, that margin is getting very, very small. At some point, we may be compromising our ability to serve even just homes, right? And we stay on top of the policy and the investments that we need so that we don't get to them.
For clarity, is this 200 megawatts inclusive of the planning reserve margin? Or would that be even in addition to 2,000 megawatts, but I don't know what I said, it's like.
Those are gross load.
This is just gross load, and then we have planning reserve margin on top of it. So we're actually talking about like 3,000.
In the winter.
I mean, I'm rounding it up. I mean, I'm rounding up.
Yes, it's small.
What's 300 megawatts?
Javier, I appreciate the clarification earlier. I do want to stress again, we are not saying no or wait to housing developments, individual projects, small commercial. In fact, where we start to look very acutely from a system perspective and for some of those financial perspectives is around 20 megawatts. And here's the dichotomy. 20 megawatts is a big load. 20 megawatt customer out of 415,000 customers would be about top 100. Right? And yet the frequency of requests, because of how the load is changing, the load request is changing, is profound. And unfortunately, to the prior, I want to ask you to go back, Aaron, to the prior slide around the economic impact. Generally, where those heavier, more intensive energy customers are, also with those that are highly prized from an economic development standpoint and or offer high employment. Not an absolute, but generally, therein lies the economy, and hence the title of this slide. We are serving a vast amount of growth, and yes, we are being necessary. All right, I want to hit on this just a little bit more. We started to touch on it in the prior conversation. What do we see driving the load growth? Certainly there are national and local demand drivers, and I won't read all of this. We read national headlines. We understand what goes on from an economic perspective nationally, where there's an intensive effort for reshoring manufacturing and industrial, bringing those jobs back to the United States. And more locally, we see that centered around priorities at the state level, like biofuels and full value ag initiatives that often also are very energy intensive. There are certainly rising data center requests, and just that term tends to draw a lot of emotion. We have to acknowledge that. And yet I think it's also clearly a federal priority from artificial intelligence, another term that evokes emotions that I'm channeled by and channeling and reflecting on comments from our national defense customers in the area that talk about the importance of artificial intelligence to the United States, not only commercially, but militarily. So I just wanted to acknowledge that it's a term in an industry that evokes emotion, but certainly one that's driving growth. And we're seeing increasing electrification of transportation and buildings. So EVs for personal vehicles of themselves are not in our service territory driving a giant load impact, but we're monitoring them closely. They are continuing to grow. And yet we are seeing electrification of buildings, some along the urban core, fully electrified just for ease of construction. There are certainly also community and state priorities, many of which, and if not all of which, we know about: urban core redevelopment, streetcar expansion, other revitalization projects, target industries such as biotech, defense, medical, UNMC expansion, for example, the potential and likelihood of additional missions at Offutt Air Force Base. And also we have state, regional, and local economic development plans and priorities such as Inland Port, the Airport Business Park, the Freeman Inland Port. And then in terms of the jobs and impact, what we know of the customers that we have in our project in waiting. These are not our figures. These come from our partners. Those represent about 1,900 jobs and about $11.5 billion in capital investment. That's what's associated with those projects that we cite as megawatt needs. For projects that are less certain, but out further, potentially out further, that number almost flips. It's about 8,900 jobs and another just shy of $2 billion in potential capital investment. So no economic development person would stand here and say every single one of those will happen just as planned. We know that they are all in a queue and work through a process, but I share that just to indicate what is on the table, so to speak. Aaron, I think you could proceed and we'll wrap up. So the community prosperity and growth are keys to achieving well-being for every resident as a recognized priority for economic development. OPPD is committed to cultivating the growth of vibrant and thriving communities. I want to pause on that for just a little bit. One of many things that have been talked about is community development and community prosperity. One of the things that we don't bring jobs, people don't come here just to consume electrons, but we provide an essential service that without which those things can't happen. So we take that part of the equation seriously. Available and reliable energy is a prerequisite for businesses in the new industries that so many are trying to secure to locate here. And a North Omaha extension ensures greater energy availability, strengthening the communities. So I will pause for any questions we'll address.
Okay. Thank you, Tim. We're getting close to the presentation. Thank you for hanging in there. It's been a lot, but I really appreciate the conversation. Believe it or not, this is the summarized version. So we appreciate members of the public here in the room and those who are still online. We have over 100 people who have been listening. So I really appreciate that. So let's go to the next slide. Let me read. So a big part of my job is obviously dictated by the board. The board has delegated a lot of authority to me to run the organization and lead the organization. The board delegated that authority to me, and it says the CEO shall use prudent judgment in the exercise of the delegations in a manner that is operationally and economically sound, serves the best interest of OPPD's customer owners and the community, employs prudent business practices, balances the risks and benefits of the actions, and does not expose OPPD to unreasonable risk. I'm reading from BL7. This is our governance loop. If the CEO reasonably determines that an activity related to the delegations presents, regardless of the size of the financial commitment, a unique and significant operational risk to OPPD, a significant impact to customers, a significant impact to community relations, and a significant impact to OPPD's reputation, or materially compromises the policies and goals established by the board, then the CEO shall inform and consult with the board in a timely manner and may request that the board take appropriate actions. I read these because this is what we're here to. A lot of these pressures, a lot of these risks started to emerge about a year ago. And as you've heard from the team, they're not single issue, right? There are many of them that have appeared, and we've talked about many of them. about reliability and resilience, availability of power. And so that's the reason it took us a while to have these conversations with board members. And we have, as I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting on this topic, we have been talking about this for a while. We have been trying to understand the problem, trying to understand the risks and balancing them. And that's the reason why we're here today, sharing this with the public. You can read the slide here, but really summarizing what we've covered is reliability first. Converting the North Omaha Station too soon increases the risk of rolling blackouts. Do we have a model to say specifically when and how? You heard from the team, not on every case, but I think it's important to hear the degradation of a lot of these reliability metrics that are occurring. Affordable power. Earlier in the day, we talked about our COP for 2026 and rate increases. We also talked about what to expect in terms of rate increases for the next 5 years. Things are not going to get any cheaper, and I think we're talking about rate increases. Oh my goodness. Now I'm going to get distracted. We talk about community well-being, the reliability, the resilience in our distribution system, and the strength for growth that Tim just talked about are allowing us to do the work that we do, which is serving load, fulfilling the obligation to serve load, which in turn converts into jobs and activity and just prosperity in the region. This is against the other side of the coin, which is, well, if we extend the operations of North Omaha Station, that means that we won't be able to achieve that additional 10% reduction in CO2 emissions that we were counting on in 2027. Very important piece. If we didn't have that, this decision would be a lot easier. But there's another side of it. I want to make it very, very clear here that, and it's me. This is my responsibility. My recommendation to the board of directors is to extend operations of North Omaha Station as it exists today. And you're going to see this in the resolution here in a couple of minutes. But I also want to make it very clear that I don't make those decisions. My job is to recommend, to provide advice, to share risks. Ultimately, the beauty of public power is our board members are representing the public and the people who voted you in, and you will have the opportunity to weigh in and make this decision on behalf of your customer owners. That, according to the plan, we'll present the resolution today. We'll have a public comment period, which is approximately 30 days between now and the next board meeting. It's not quite 30 days. And then for the board to consider the resolution in December. That's currently the plan. I'm going to read quickly something that a good friend of mine, a colleague of mine wrote, which I think it encapsulates what we have today. We face a real-time supply challenge. Demand is outpacing generation. While our long-term plan is to retire coal and build a cleaner, more diversified system, converting the North Omaha Station now would compromise our ability to serve new and existing customers, providing reliability, affordability, and community stability. Extending its operation helps us provide life-sustaining electricity to existing and new customer owners, keep the lights on, mitigate even steeper rate increases in customer bills, and give our clean energy transition time to succeed responsibly. This is not a retreat. It is a safeguard on the path forward. With that, I'm going to pass it on to Scott Fovish. He can talk a little bit about governance and the resolution.
Well, Hap likes it. Scott Fovish, Vice President, Corporate Strategy and Governance. So we can. Very good. Just to highlight the resolution, I want to highlight a couple of points. One, at the very beginning of this and taking all into account, it was really what are we talking about in terms of the initial resolution of 6518? Are we talking about a repeal or rescission of it? What are we intending? And it was no, it's simply a modification, and it speaks to Javier's point, where this is really that bridge, the opportunity for the continued path forward in a way that's prudent and responsible. to provide context, and I think understanding that all resolutions are a part of corporate history is important, I think, in the whereases. And this group has just spent 3 hours really understanding information that speaks to each one of these whereas clauses. So I don't want to belabor them at 4:35 in the afternoon because it would be redundant with everything that was addressed earlier. What I would like to do is slide down to the now therefores and keep one of the whereases up. One of the whereases is important. This first one, that the district will continue to provide updates to the board and to the public regarding operational decisions, environmental performance, and community engagement efforts related to North Omaha Station. The intention would be, of course, to continue to provide some level of transparency and visibility into what's happening at whatever frequency is appropriate. The 3 now therefores that came up was one, the first one is modifying 6518 to authorize the continued operation of North Omaha Station in its current configuration until such time as system conditions, customer demand, regulatory requirements, and infrastructure readiness enable a responsible transition of North Omaha Station generation units. The second is that the district shall continue to monitor and assess the operational status, as I alluded to earlier. And the third was that the board of directors, oh, hello. Well, this is a delight. That the board of directors would commit to formalizing a subcommittee of the board for public officials and OPPD management to recommend a community development framework to the OPPD board. That would really provide objectives about how to reflect community development priorities, making sure that it stays consistent with OPPD's overall mission. But this gets, I think, a little bit more to what you were alluding to earlier, Craig, as well, the importance of connecting in this space and doing things with intentionality. So that's the framing of the resolution, as Javier highlighted. The intention would be to post this for customer feedback over the next roughly 30 days. I don't have the day count in front of me, but we would then provide that feedback for board consideration and action come the December board. Any questions or things to consider at this point on the resolution?
I would just add, Javier does a wonderful job of taking responsibility on himself around the recommendation. But I would just add that from one, I won't speak for my colleagues, but from another professional's perspective, he is not alone in the recommendation and to support the recommendation that's being made regarding North Omaha for the reasons stated and acknowledging the downside of that decision. But I didn't want you to feel alone there. It was well informed, and you continue to seek input from all of us along the way, and I concur.
Directors, any comments regarding this resolution?
First, I want to thank you for doing your job and doing it well. This is what we want from you, and I know you're taking heat. So I want to thank you for that. On the resolution, when I see until such time as system conditions, customer demand, that stuff, it makes me go, are we ever going to be able to do anything? Candidly, so I would be curious to understand what mechanism we can have that would help us understand when those system conditions, like what thresholds do we need to meet so that we can have something that's actionable? I can't imagine that makes sense in a resolution necessarily, but certainly it lacks meaning unless or until I have something that helps me understand that. And then I'd be curious about any framing, conversation, next steps as it relates to the final for the resolve, the board subcommittee. I mean, we had some conversation around that a little bit in closed session, just because it's the first time some of us have seen it. So I'd like, as I said this morning, I'd like to see something a bit more concrete in there. I don't necessarily know what that is today necessarily, but I'll stop there. That's, yeah.
Yeah, and I think just reiterating that this is a draft.
Yeah.
And it will
Yep.
change
Yep.
between now and
Yep.
then. Can I just quickly, I think there's still one more slide at the end. We can come back to the resolution in a minute, but I'll address the system conditions. This is an incredibly important piece of the puzzle, and he agrees. We perform on a constant basis. We perform resource planning all the time. However, there's at least every 5 years we sit down and we do this very thorough process where we invite members of the public and seek stakeholder input for what we used to call the integrated resource plan. That picture on the slide shows the integrated resource plan we had in 2021, and I call that out because this time around, what you will have in 2026, it will be an integrated system plan. No longer is it important for us to look at what generation resources we need, transmission, distribution. It's a whole system is changing, and we need to really take a comprehensive look at that. You talked about how that results of those study is going to be available sometime in late summer of next year, in the August timeframe. What's going to happen here is, I think part of this resolution and part of the conversation we have is clearly for me to give instruction to the team to say, as you plan for the future to serve load, let's figure out what assumptions we make on serving load, what type of policy we have on how much load, who do we serve, how much margin do we build. Building margin is expensive because it means us building more generation that we may need, that we may see now, but we're already here today, and when we have a lot more generation requests that we need. So a lot of those assumptions are going to be part of the work that the team is going to do, and very clearly in there has to include the conversion of North Omaha Station, or perhaps even the retirement. We may not even need to do a conversion. What do we need to fully retire the station? I'm not saying that's one of it, but those are the scenarios that I need the team to put forward. As they give that information back to us, I'm going to ask, don't just tell me what machines we need in place, but ultimately what those machines are going to deliver in terms of system conditions. What are we going to look at in terms of system conditions? So you and your successors in the board in the future and management, we can say, okay, these are the milestones, the mile markers that we need to see in order for us to allow load to grow, in order for us to safely, responsibly transition generation. North Omaha Station being probably the biggest one in there, but there are other units that need to be, we need to start looking at retirements of some of the other units we have. So I think that's going to be very important for me, and I would say for the rest of the board to say what do we need to see, and also what other metrics are we going to keep track of that will tell us at some point we may need to move faster. For example, on North Omaha Station, if that accreditation degrades to a point where it's really no longer providing any value or very little value, those are the things that we need to constantly monitor and report back to the board, and for us to plan and say what are we going to do to replace that generation. So this integrated system plan plays a key role in the greater picture. Again, not just for the North Omaha decision, as Director Williams accurately mentioned. That is just one piece of the puzzle. This is going to talk about a lot more generation we need to build to meet the energy and the capacity demands of our customers going forward. So yeah, next year this is going to be take front and center stage for us.
Okay, thank you.